speaking to the parent organizations and boosters about a process for that with me and Ms. Campy and Ms. Newman. Internally, we have a process set up, so you're starting to see the updates coming, and we're excited for that. We have the following sporting events coming up this weekend. A lot of swimming this weekend. We have the county championships. And at our booster club meeting this week, we talked about how we have one swimmer in particular who's doing really well and could be competing for the county championship. So go Viking swimmers. We have our varsity wrestling county championship tomorrow and on Saturday as well. So good luck to all. And we also have varsity gymnastics on Saturday as well. We're excited for our high school music tour to depart for Europe next Friday. Wishing you all the best and an amazing adventure. Represent us well. Go Vikings go in Europe. And just a couple of notes. Last Monday, I traveled to Albany with James Versacchi, the chair of our LAC committee, to meet with several elected officials, Senate and Assembly staff to advocate for increased funding due to our revenue crisis related to the loss of utility Class 3 tax payments. We will continue to ask for funding to protect our students and taxpayers. This year, as we'll mention over the next several weeks in the budget presentations, we're losing $2.388 million in funding. That'll impact our budget planning. And we're going to be discussing tonight and throughout February how we're handling that. We stand to lose a large sum of over $8 million in one single tax year in the year 2027-28 alone. So we're going to talk about how we're going to start planning for that and how that should impact our planning, in our view, this year. And Ava, my last announcement was your last announcement about sports night. Thank you to the students and to our parents for being so flexible for making that work because of the tour, but also because we know we have a playoff game that's going to be on that night. So we're excited for that game. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to move to our student recognition, but I want to make an announcement. Lots of pictures are encouraged. So feel free to get up from your chair, move around. When you see somebody you want to take a picture of, you can take as much time as you want. We're used to being here until late, so don't be bashful.
So I'm going to ask Dr. Smythe and Dr. McCary to help me out as you usually do. Thank you. And Ms. Campy, thank you. So I think we will call up our two women's cross-country team coaches and all of our athletes, and then we're going to say a few words crafted by the coaches about your performance this year. So if Coach Levy and Coach Welch, if you could please come up. All of our athletes up now. Amelia Aguirre. Kristen Arena. Lila Bonvicino. Chloe Brady. Hannah Checo. Chloe Connolly, Sophia Glazarev, Annika Kalin, Joanna Kenny, Nicoletta Kenny, Isabel Lee, Louisa Ludmar, Sophia Marchioli, Jessica Palin, Dylan Reesberg. Hannah Sadowski. Salerno. Michaela Talamo. Levy's mobilizing you like he always does. Well done, Coach. Now I see why we have so much success. Isabella Wellen. Greer Wilson. Miriam Zelkind. Oh, Bella Martocci. So, congratulations to the North Shore High School women's cross-country team. This past fall, they were able to achieve some really special milestones. They won their 200th consecutive league competition and are now 209-0 since October 10th, 2007. Congratulations to Coach Levy and Coach Welch on this tremendous accomplishment. Why don't you guys come up front? This is the longest win streak for cross country in Long Island history. Keeping it going. No pressure, but you're keeping it going. In addition, they were Nassau County Class 3 champions. They defeated the other 18 teams in the county and won by an outstanding 77 points. This is the program's 17th county championship since 2006. Additional congratulations to sophomore Joanna Kenny, who ran the fastest time in Nassau County and qualified for the New York State Cross Country Championship. Well done. We're going to take some photos now. Okay, up to the approval of minutes. Everyone's welcome to stay. We are going to have an independent budget review in a little bit. You know you want to stay, guys. Come on.
Oh, come on. All right, here we go. So, trustees, we need to approve the minutes of January 25th, 2024. Any amendments, comments, questions on the minutes? Nope. Thank you, Betty. Hearing none, we'll accept the minutes as is.
Excuse me,
Oh, yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
getting a text message that the video is not coming up on the live stream, that it was slow and choppy, and now there's no video. Okay.
Thank you.
Just so you know.
Thank you.
That's what we call point of order, right? Point of order. Point of order. Excellent. Thank you.
Can I just ask one
Yes.
question? Do we have sound, Mr. Lamonaco? Okay, thank you.
So we're good to go? All right. All right, sounds good. All right, so tonight, we have some important business. On December 14th, this board unanimously voted to enter into an agreement with Dr. Joseph Dragon for an independent budget review for our district. This decision was the result of many board discussions and requests from community residents. Tonight, as part of our regular business, we will be having that presentation and subsequent board discussion. Before we begin, I would like to thank Dr. Z and Mr. Pappas for their work on this, as well as the board for approving this review. It is another example of how this board is committed to being fully transparent to our taxpayers, open-minded to new ideas both from residents and professionals, and dedicated to finding ways to preserve our uniquely North Shore education in the most cost-effective ways. I should note that the board has been provided with a draft report from Dr. Dragon that's also been posted online. I anticipate tonight's conversation to yield additional areas of exploration that could be included in the final report we receive and provide to the public. Dr. Dragon has spent 54 years in Long Island public education. He has worked as a teacher, special education director, high school principal, elementary school principal, assistant superintendent for business and operations. He is an adjunct professor in the school business leadership program at both LIU and Hofstra. And interestingly, he is a resident of Northport, a village which has also been affected by its own LIPA decommissioning. I'm sorry, Dr. Dragon. So thank you tonight for coming. Please find your way to the podium. I think we want the trustees to also find their seats in the audience.
Yes, and I did want to mention, I have a very brief postscript initial processing presentation. I'm going to go right after the first presentation by Mr. Dragon, and then we'll have questions
Perfect.
after, if that's okay.
Excellent.
Super quick.
Always an overachiever. Have to share the spotlight. All right, everyone take their seat.
I know.
It's go.
I saw that. That's kind of amazing. You don't need to touch anything. No. It just senses that I'm here. Thank you for that very generous introduction, Dr. McCary, especially since I don't have an earned doctorate, but thank you very much for awarding it to me. Dr. McCary and members of the Board of Education, Dr. Z and members of Central Office, it's my pleasure to be with you here tonight to present this draft report with some tentative recommendations. I hope that as a result of our meeting tonight, that you'll be able to give me some sense of direction as to what additional areas you may want me to fill in for you, and so I could finalize the report and present it to you. Yes. Sure. So as Dr. McCary said, I have been involved in public education for 54 years. I retired at the end of December last year, having worked in a large number of districts, interestingly, some very small ones, East Rockaway, for example, which could probably fit in one of the schools here in North Shore, and some very large ones, including Connecticut for a month or so. So I've had a variety of experiences in special education, in building administration, in central office. Perhaps my most important experience is as a grandfather. And as I will say to you to start this presentation, I would be proud to have my grandchildren attending North Shore schools. Your educational reputation is outstanding, and I think that you have a lot to be proud of. And as Dr. McCary also mentioned, I do live in Northport, and as Bill Clinton would say, I can feel your pain, because we're going through exactly the same glide path that you're going through. Charge. The Board of Education did give me a charge to conduct a comparative analysis of cost per pupil and total cost in a variety of areas which are listed there, which we will go through, to provide a comparative analysis of personnel and student ratios and total personnel in the North Shore School District, and to provide considerations for possible savings in North Shore. I want you to know that I used public sources of information for this report. I did not rely on interviews with my colleagues. Although that would have been very fruitful, I decided that I really wanted to present information to you that anybody who wished to could go to the primary source and see the actual data. So the information is coming from the Office of the State Comptroller, the New York State Education Department, and similar sources. I did have to FOIL some information, but again, the FOIL process is a public process as well. In a nutshell, here's the problem. According to the New York State School Report Card, in 2022, the cost per pupil in North Shore was a little over $40,000, compared to the other four target districts, which ranged from 33 down to 25. Now, this measure is actually the one that business officials use. It's called Approved Operating Expenditures per TAPU. TAPU stands for Total Aidable Pupil Units. And what that means is we strip away, sure. Approved operating expenditures strips away those costs that are not directly related to instruction in the classroom. For example, it strips away the cost of transportation, of capital expenditures, and it leaves the operating costs for the instructional program. Total aidable pupil units means a weighted count of pupils who are actually in attendance in school, as opposed to an enrollment count, which could be a group of students who are enrolled but not attending. It also weights students, so students with special needs are weighted more heavily. The TAPU in North Shore is closer to 3,000 than the 2,500 that you have enrolled. The approved operating expenditures are somewhat less than 116 million that you actually spent last year. However, rather than using that measure, which is kind of esoteric, and Jamie and I love to talk about things like AOE per TAPU because it makes us sound smart. The reality is that people in your community look at the budget and look at the enrolled children and say, per pupil cost is the budget divided by the enrollment. That measure parallels very closely AOE per TAPU. So I'm going to use that measure so that people who want to see where I got the numbers from can actually go back to the source data and do the calculations themselves. Did a look at the 21-22 data to see whether or not it is consistent with the 22-23 data. Here's what it looks like in 21-22, and again, this is a measure of your total general fund expenditures divided by your total enrollment. And as you can see in this measure, North Shore comes out at about 44, and the other 4 target districts all come out between 39, and 29. Very similar results for 22-23. Per pupil, North Shore's average per pupil expenditure in 22-23 was $11,000 higher than the average per pupil expenditure in the other 4 target districts. And I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit later as to why this is the case. If you see in the report itself, if you see a cell that's highlighted in yellow, that's a number which is at least $100 per pupil higher than the average of the other 4 districts. If you see a number that's highlighted in red, that's a number that's at least $100 less than the average of the other 4 districts. So let's get into the first area I was charged with looking at, which is special education. Special education services, as required by state and federal law, are determined by the Committee on Special Education, which makes recommendations directly to the Board of Education, not to the Superintendent of Schools, but directly to the Board of Education. And the Board of Education has the responsibility of approving or asking the committee to go back and look again at their recommendation. The Board of Education cannot alter the recommendation of the Special Education Committee. It can only ask them to look at it again. Now, there could be a number of reasons why the cost per pupil in this area is higher than the average of the surrounding districts. For example, it could be the number of students who have been identified. It could be the needs of the identified students are significantly greater than the needs of identified students in the other districts. Or it could be that the staff in North Shore is more experienced and therefore earning a higher salary. Same staff, but higher salary results in higher cost. So what I did was I took a look at the personnel master file from the New York State Education Department, which lists every teacher in every school district, their salaries, the average salaries, and compared that North Shore against the other target districts. And I have to tell you that the salaries in North Shore are in line with the salaries in the other 4 school districts. You are not overpaying your teachers. Okay, and the union did not ask me to say that. Let's take a look at the number of students identified. I would wish that I could tell you whether or not the needs of students in North Shore are greater than the needs of students in other districts or vice versa. But I can't because I don't, by law, have access to that kind of information. That's only between the Board of Education and the committee to make that decision. But I can tell you this from publicly available information. The number of students identified with disabilities in North Shore was 429 roughly 17% of your student population, compared to the other 4 target districts where the percentage of students identified ranged from 8 to about 12%. So it's clear that the number of students being served in North Shore is larger as a percentage, and in 3 cases as an absolute number, than the other 4 target districts. That is the cause of the increased cost per pupil in special education. Per pupil cost of teacher salaries at both the elementary and the secondary levels are significantly higher than the cost in the other 4 target districts, even though the per teacher salaries are not different. All right, let me say that again. The per pupil cost of teacher salaries is higher, but the per teacher salaries are not. Okay, which implies that you have more teachers than the other 4 target districts. And here's an example of why at the elementary level. This chart comes directly from the BOCES Negotiations Information Service, which provides for every elementary configuration the number of classes at various sizes. So as you can see, for example, Herrick's has 7 classes at the elementary level with 25 or 26 or 27 students. North Shore has none. Similarly, North Shore has 8 classes between 13 and 15 students. Only one other district, Jericho, has 1 class that size. So the average elementary class size in North Shore of 17.93, right, is less than the average of the other 4 districts. It's close to Jericho, but it's significantly less than the other 3. If the average class size in North Shore somehow was 21 instead of 18, you would be able to eliminate 9 elementary class sections. And the salary and benefits associated with those 9 elementary class sections would be in the neighborhood of $100,000, given the fact that an average teacher salary and benefits is over $120,000 apiece. Has the lowest ratio of pupils to teacher, pupils per FTE, of the 5 target districts. The number of students per full-time equivalent teacher, full-time equivalent just means that if you have 2 half-time teachers, they make 1 full-time equivalent. All right, I don't want to throw a lot of jargon at you, but that's the way we talk about teachers, as full-time equivalents. You could have 100 part-time teachers, but only 60 full-time equivalents. All right, so we're comparing apples to apples here. The number of students per full-time equivalent teacher in North Shore Senior High School is approximately 3 less than the corresponding ratio in the other target districts. If the number of students per teacher in the high school was similar to the average of the other 4 target districts, there would be a need for only 66.4 teachers instead of 98. A reduction of approximately 31.6 full-time equivalent staff members. I say this with a grain of salt because I know, and again, I would love to have my grandchildren come here, I know that with the staff that you have, you offer some absolutely marvelous programs. Foreign language in the elementary schools, STEAM in the elementary schools, not only the AP program, but also the IB program at the secondary schools. So the instructional program is made possible by having teachers at this level. Result of eliminating 31.6 full-time staff members would mean, full-time equivalent staff members, that you would have to offer fewer elective courses, larger elementary class sizes, etc. Talking about the high school program, AP and IB, of the 5 districts that I studied, only North Shore has the IB program. The IB program, International Baccalaureate, is a comprehensive college-level program. Students who complete the IB program get a certificate that entitles them to skip their first year of college. That's a lot different than the AP program, which allows students possibly to get exempt from an entry-level course at college. They could actually skip an entire year and actually, in their 4 years of undergraduate school, complete their master's degree. Now that has some value, and parents of children in North Shore should recognize that value. You're at the top with a passing rate of 76% and 90% taking these college-level examinations. I want you to note that this is a duplicated count because some children take both AP and IB. So we're going to talk about facilities. Operation of your plant is done at a slightly higher cost, $547 per pupil, higher than the average, but maintenance of your plant is done at a lower cost, approximately $333 less per pupil. So altogether, the operation of your buildings is slightly higher than average. But it should be noted that you maintain 5 separate school buildings housing 2,519 children. The other 4 target districts, Jericho has 5 buildings, but it has 3,176 pupils. Roslyn has 5 buildings, but it has 3,300 pupils. Herricks has 5 buildings, but it has 4,100 pupils. And Manhasset has 4 buildings, but it has 3,009 pupils. So the buildings in the other target districts are more efficiently utilized than they are here in North Shore. A lot of time on this slide now, because you guys spend less for transportation than any other district in the comparison. Congratulations to you for having your own fleet, even though Roslyn and Manhasset, Roslyn and Herricks also have their own fleet. The Jericho and Manhasset are totally dependent on contracted services, and North Shore is providing transportation, which is kind of one of those expenses that would get knocked out of approved operating expense. But North Shore's transportation is done extremely efficiently in comparison to the other districts. We're spending less in central data processing than the other target districts, and about the same in computer-assisted instruction. So there's not much for me to look at here. Sorry. Not only do you have a dynasty in your cross-country team, but I understand that your girls' basketball team is undefeated. Your boys' basketball team is on its way to another championship. So you have a wonderful interscholastic athletic program and co-curricular program. The chances of these costs being due to higher coaching salaries is nil to none. You're just offering more opportunities. Unfortunately, security is not monitored by the state in the way that it should be. We have a function which we should be using, but not all of us do, to separate out the costs of security. And that function, 1622 in the accounting codes, is not used in any of the target districts. So unfortunately, I can't make a comparison in terms of security. But I will tell you that I was greeted by 3 security officers tonight who didn't let me walk past the door without checking who I was, why I was here, and that made me feel good. Legal expenses. Legal expenses are normally coded under the function 1420. However, I am told by Jamie that you have decided to code some of those expenses under the Board of Education because the board is directly involved in the litigation over LIPA. So you will see, when you look at legal expenses, you'll see as if the Board of Education is spending more per pupil than other boards of education, but the legal expense code looks like you're spending less. It's really kind of a wash. I was asked to look at the food service program, but I want you to know that the food service program is not a taxpayer-funded program. It's a proprietary fund, meaning it's supposed to stand on its own. But when I look at the subsidy that North Shore provides to that food service program, which, by the way, in your budget was $150,000 in 22-23, the food service program itself generates a small profit of $70.06 per pupil. The subsidy of $150,000 means that you're subsidizing the program to the tune of $59.95 per pupil. That's the taxpayer's contribution to the food service program. The difference of $10.50 per pupil is kept in the school lunch fund balance. It's not given back to the general fund. So, as an aside, one of the things that you might want to take a look at is whether or not the subsidy needs to be as large. If the food service program is consistently making money, rather than adding to the school lunch fund balance, you may want to cut back the subsidy in the general fund and let the school lunch fund really stand on its own. You're very lucky in that regard. There are not many schools that have that situation where the lunch fund actually makes money. In Roslyn, I was kicking in $450,000 a year in taxpayer money to subsidize the school lunch program, and we were still losing money. It had to do with the fact that we had an open campus, everybody was allowed to go wherever they wanted, and children decided, even though we put in pizza ovens and you name it, we made the place a college Rathskeller without the beer, students still wanted the opportunity to go out because that was their choice. So, here's the cost, here's the revenue, and there's that small profit of $70.06, offset by the $59.95 that you're kicking into the program. We'll get to the meat. Staffing ratios, which was one of the charges. North Shore, with 2,551 students in the 22-23 school year and 289.09 teachers in total, had 8.8 students per full-time equivalent teacher, about 3 less on average than the other 4 target districts. When you look at the total staff, which includes administration, aides, assistants, etc., it's about the same. You have about 7.2 students per full-time equivalent staff member compared to about 10 on average in the other 4 districts. Take a look at 2 other areas, PPS and administration, roughly the same, but I understand that when I collected this data, there has been a change, that there's 1 less administrator in the district, so this number for 23-24 would look different, and we'll get to that in a moment. PPS stands for Pupil Personnel Services, and it includes guidance counselors, social workers, psychologists, and the school nurses. Okay, so here's pictorially a graphic representation of the information that I just spewed out at you. North Shore is second from the right. You'll see that North Shore as a total has more staff members than 3 of the other target districts, despite the fact that its enrollment is lower. The blue line in the middle of the bar represents the number of full-time equivalents, the number of students per full-time equivalent. Shore is significantly less pupils per full-time equivalent. And I mentioned before about salaries. Here are the salary ranges of professional staff in the 5 target districts. The average salary of all professional staff in North Shore for 22-23 was $126,176. That includes teachers, administrators, teacher assistants. It does not include teacher aides, custodians, clerical staff, because they're not members of the professional staff. Right? If I could get their salaries, that number would be lower, but this is just professional staff. And I keep kidding Dr. Z that the reason why this is the case is because the superintendent is underpaid in North Shore. He did pay me to say that. Going along with the number of staff members is, of course, employee benefits. You have, by law, to make a contribution to the retirement system based on payroll. The contribution is a percentage of payroll. The employer contribution to FICA, which is an income, as you know it as Social Security, is 6.2% of an employee's payroll, to a maximum this year of $168,000. And in addition, the employer pays a Medicare tax based on payroll of 1.45% of payroll. So it's a straight line. The larger the payroll, the higher the FICA and Medicare taxes that the district is paying. North Shore, along with Roslyn and Herricks, operates its own bus fleet. And as I told you before, you should be very proud you do it very efficiently. One of the problems with operating your own bus fleet, however, is that your workers' compensation costs are higher, because workers' comp separates out transportation employees from the rest of the group because they're more prone to injuries. So as a result of your operating your own fleet, your workers' comp costs are somewhat higher than the workers' comp costs in districts that contract out for their services. Sure, teachers contribute 20% of the cost of their health insurance, while the corresponding rate in 3 of the other 4 target districts is 23%. So your teachers are contributing somewhat less than the average contribution compared to the other target districts. There is one district, Jericho, whose contribution rate is 17.5%. It's a very generous contribution rate in these times. Here's what that looks like. The retirement system, the state retirement system is your civil service, custodial, security staff, clerical staff, etc. The teachers' retirement system is significantly above, again, only because your salary, your payroll is above because you have more teachers. So when you measure it per pupil, your teacher's retirement system cost looks higher. Or so good. Next 3 slides are going to be an introduction for Dr. Z, who's going to talk to you about budget implications. But I thought I'd give you a little bit of history as to how your budget over the past 4 years has looked in some of the major areas. This is not a detailed look. There is a detailed look in the report itself that actually goes line by line through the budget. But this gives you an overview. You can see that, and this is only North Shore now. This is not in comparison to anybody else. You can see that in virtually every area, the budget has grown somewhat, except in administration, where the budget has actually declined a little bit. And I think that's related to the fact that you did eliminate 1 administrative position. Regular instruction, special and occupational education, and employee benefits, those 3 categories are anywhere from 70 to 71% of your budget. I point this out to you because if you think that you're going to lower your per pupil expenses by buying fewer paper clips, it's not going to happen. The money is in the staff. This is a labor-intensive operation. Going from left to right, just so that you get some sense, the left set of bars is general support. That includes the Board of Education, the Superintendent's Office, the Business Office. Supervision of instruction is the second set of bars. That includes Dr. Smythe and all of the principals and directors. The third set of bars is regular instruction, K-12 instruction. The fourth set of bars is special and occupational education, then instructional media, then pupil personnel services, then co-curricular and interscholastic athletics. You're getting big bang for your buck there, aren't you? All sorts of state championships. Transportation, employee benefits, transfers, and all other. Decided to try to break it out also a little bit more finely into just salaries and benefits. So in this chart, benefits are on the far left. Secondary teachers is the next set of bars. Elementary teachers is the third set. Special education teachers is the fourth set. Administrators, then PPS, then clerical salaries, then custodial salaries, then aides, then security, then athletics and co-curricular, bus drivers, English language learners, substitute teachers, and that last set of bars is all others. And on the next chart, here's what the all others consists of. You do transfers into the debt service fund so that you could pay off bonds. You do transfers into the special aid fund so that you could run your special programs prior to receiving the grant money from the state. You do a transfer, we talked about this before, into the school lunch fund of $150,000. All of those transfers are reflected in the first set of bars. You also utilize BOCES. BOCES provides you with services and you get aid back the following year. But here's what your budget looks for BOCES services. That's the second set of bars. The next set of bars is contract and other. That means like your maintenance contracts. Your maintenance contracts are not included in that. I broke them out separately. Supplies, tuition, utilities, surprisingly small when you look at it in relation to the other costs. Insurance, equipment, tax anticipation notes, which is the cost of borrowing money prior to your receiving state aid and prior to your receiving the tax revenue. Software, and the very last one is continuing education. There are three potential solutions. First, at the elementary school level, you should consider the possibility of reorganizing your schools. I want you to know that the problem we're talking about is really in the eye of the beholder. Parents and children who are enjoying small neighborhood elementary schools with small class sizes and extraordinary opportunities, such as foreign language instruction like Mandarin in kindergarten. Those parents and children who are enjoying a rich academic environment at the high school with 2 college-level programs, and those homeowners whose home values in North Shore far exceed the value of similar homes in many other districts, do not see the problem the same way as the 70 or so % of taxpayers in your community, like every other community, who do not have children enrolled in the public schools. So you have a problem in the sense that you're providing services to a quarter to a third of the population, but asking 100% of the population to contribute to it. Princeton plan is something you should consider for the organization of the elementary schools. Briefly, a Princeton plan would take the 200 or so children per grade level and house them all in one building. So, Seacliff, I'm making this up, trust me, this is not in my thought pattern, and don't yell at me for making this suggestion. But Seacliff could become a K-1 center. Glen Head becomes a 2-3 center. And Glenwood Landing becomes a 4-5 center. Why would that work? Well, if you had 200 children at a grade level in a building, and you assigned 10 teachers to that grade level, boom, 20 kids per class, done. Not as it is now, within some buildings there are 15 in a class, and in other buildings there may be 18, 19, 20, depending upon the break, how it breaks. If you were pressed to reduce the budget, Instead of 10 teachers per class with 20 students in each, you could have 9 sections with about 21 or 22 students in each. If the financial situation turns around and you feel like you can afford it, you can have 11 sections with 18 students in each. But it would be consistent across the entire district. So that's one possibility. You may even want to consider having one building be the K-1 center and the other 2 buildings split 2 to 5 and be neighborhood schools, so that everyone could have a neighborhood school from grades 2 through 5. Just a thought. Second suggestion is at the secondary level, consider the possibility of imposing a minimum enrollment in each class section, such as an arbitrary number I picked was 20, before the class is actually offered. Why would you do that? Right now, if you offer a class and 15 children sign up for the class, by the time conflicts get resolved, and anybody who's ever scheduled a high school knows that the 15 students who ask for a singleton, of those 15, they probably, only 8 of them will actually be able to get into the class because they also want to take chorus and advanced French and economics, and you name it. So you're now offering classes, I am sure, of 7, 8, or 9 students. If you set the threshold at 20 students requesting the course, maybe you could offer the course every other year and still meet the needs of the children in the high school. One of the problems that you have to think about is what happens to a student who is finishing a 4-year sequence in foreign language, and there's only 7 students who could possibly enroll in the 4th year. Well, that may be an exception that you might need to make in order to provide that student with the opportunity to complete the sequence. Third, whoops, I went backwards. And a third potential solution is at the district level, consider the services being delivered to see if they could be more efficiently and legally reduced. Here I'm talking about your Committee on Special Education. I'm talking about, for example, your workers' compensation insurance, which you now are completely self-insured for. You might want to look at joining a cooperative of school districts that offer workers' comp, because if you have, let's say, 20 districts in a cooperative, they're sharing the cost of the actuarial report and the administration of the claims, as opposed to your carrying that burden on your own. So, I don't want to go to that slide because I want to listen to Dr. Z, and then I think that he and I together will field any questions that you may have of either of us. Is that a good plan? Yes. Okay. All yours, baby.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dragone. And so as we were starting to process Mr. Dragone's analysis, we started thinking in real time here about the budget implications for next year and in the long term. And so I'm calling this kind of postscript to Mr. Dragone's presentation, Budget Challenges Part 3. As you know, we had a Part 1 and a Part 2 presentation in the fall about budget challenges, about navigating the road ahead, and now using data to navigate the road ahead. And just to give you a sense of what Mr. Pappas and I and Dr. Smythe have been talking about as we look at some of these possibilities, and look at cost per pupil, which is something that we've talked about in the district for many years. And so digging into it, we think is helpful to see both the possibilities that that data creates, but also the limitations. We've been talking over the last couple of years about the three lenses, and Mr. Jagone did a great job summing that up. We have our long-term residents whose taxes have shifted after many years of lower taxes, at some points the lowest taxes in Nassau County, as LIPA has been decommissioned and taxes have gone, LIPA's gone off the tax rolls, those taxes have shifted. Many long-term residents are in fixed incomes, and like all of us are facing rising costs and inflation at the same time. We also have residents who are parents, many of which have moved here since the shift has happened, and they moved into the district with the current tax structure, and they moved into the district for lower class sizes, enrichment programs, and electives. They specifically chose North Shore because we offer those things. And I can just attest to that personally, as can all of our principals. We're once principals who gave tours to many, many parents. We're still doing it. I get requests to show these programs, and there's interest because of what we offer. And these residents are also facing rising costs and inflation. And our students who want choice and options to prepare them for college or whatever path they choose after North Shore, who need academic supports, whether that's special education supports or non-special education academic supports, SEL supports, and need rich extracurriculars, music and athletics. These are no longer just, they are fun, they're enjoyable, but they are increasingly becoming a part of how our students pave their way in the world after high school, certainly in terms of sports, certainly in terms of music. I'm thinking of our salutatorian and valedictorian last year. Our valedictorian went to college on an athletic scholarship, and our salutatorian went to school for percussion to a music conservatory. So they are extracurriculars, but they're very much important to their future. Just to give you an initial picture, and we'll be going into much more depth on this as we get into our initial budget presentation on February 29th. But I've shown a version of this graph before. This is going into the planning for next year's budget. We faced an initial deficit of about $7.5 million. A big chunk of that is from loss of revenues. The LIPA loss that I mentioned earlier of $2.4 million, and then the loss of a net loss of a grant from New York State that we always got from Senator Gorin, $1 million every year. We lost that grant, but Assemblyman Levine was able to get us $250,000. So it's a net loss of $750,000. We thank Assemblyman Levine for his support. And then we have our mandatory expenses, salaries of all units, 2.25. Those are contractual obligations. Insurance, that is hitting all districts. The night shift bill, the New York State Health Insurance Program, all districts are facing an increase for us, and other benefit increases. It's $1.8 million and then special ed increases of $250,000. We're planning on using a slight state increase, an increase in the use of reserves and tuition from small programs that we're starting to lower that $7.5 million deficit by $1.5 million. That leaves us with an existing hole of about $6 million. And just to put something in perspective, and not to make light of it, without the LIPA and grant loss situation, that hole would be $2.8 million. And Mr. Pappas and I were talking about this because some districts have lost some state aid out in Suffolk County nearby. And for us, I was kind of joking, like we'd have that solved before lunch, because unfortunately over the last couple of years, we've been dealing with this crisis. And so that would be the amount we would need to raise with taxes and cuts. We could get to that amount very quickly. But I do want folks to appreciate how much harder that is with the LIPA pressure, bringing it close to $6 million. And so that's why we're doing these analyses. We're having, 8 budget presentations. We're having 20 community discussions throughout the year on the budget, because it is important, and we need all stakeholders involved. So I did some of my own, using Mr. Jagone's numbers, I did some of my own analysis and comparisons and hypotheticals to look at what would happen if our school numbers changed, if they went down, and it helped us to wrap our heads around possible reorganization and what things could look like, and what some of the limits would be. Seacliff School, in the analysis of the report, the overall total spending for Seacliff School is just over $10 million. And I compared it to Searingtown School in Herricks, which is just over $12 million. Now, Seacliff School has 331 students, Searingtown School 560. The cost per pupil is less in Searingtown School. And, I wanted to dig into that. So looking at the school level, I think was very helpful. We have a lower class size. That might explain part of it. We do have some programs that Searingtown does not offer that are unique to North Shore. And so we did a little analysis. If Seacliff Elementary had the same number of students as Searingtown Elementary, and we added the number of teachers we needed to cover that at our class ratio of 18 per class, which would cost about $1.5 million more, if we just added that number of students to get to 560, our cost per pupil would actually be lower than Herrick's cost per pupil. And that's keeping all of our specialized programs. Kind of did the inverse exercise there. What if Searingtown Elementary had the same number of students as Seacliff Elementary, and we deducted the number of teachers from their budget? And I'm using the figure of $120,000 per teacher, using the numbers that Mr. Dragone provided, the average. And so we would get to, if we deducted that number, Seacliff's, and had the same number of 330 in both buildings, Seacliff's cost per pupil would actually still be lower with all the specialized programs. So that just begged more interesting questions as to why that is. I then looked at one of the schools that's listed in the studies, one of the smaller schools in Jericho, Robert Seaman School, that has 283 students, and I found this interesting. Their total spending is less with fewer students, but their cost per pupil is really close to Seacliff School. So there's some relationship between the sheer size of the school or the district and the cost per pupil. And when you look at other districts that have a higher cost per pupil than North Shore, like Locust Valley, they have a smaller population. So there's something there, and there are a lot of factors. Don't want to oversimplify, but there is something there. Again, doing an analysis, if we wanted to get Seacliff Elementary to the same cost per pupil as Searingtown Elementary with their current student population remaining stable, so if we wanted to just aim for that cost per pupil to be $21,000, we would have to cut $3 million from the Seacliff School budget alone. That's 25 teachers we would have to cut to get to that same cost per pupil. We could not operate Seacliff School with a cut of 25 teachers, just to be honest with you. So, there are things driving cost per pupil that would make it an impossible goal, and that's fixed costs. And we looked into that a little bit. Regardless of how many students are in a building, there are things that you need to run a building. A principal, if we have a school with 1,000 students and then we lose 200, we can't have an 80% of a principal. But there are so many things like that: custodians, clerical, cafeteria, security, transportation, utilities, special education and E&L services, and debt and insurance. These costs would not be reduced if we lose students. And they make up, when you look at a building budget, about half of the cost of running that building. And so that's why the sheer number of students in the building is lower cost per pupil. On the list in the report that you'll see at some point, the draft report is posted. The elementary school with the lowest cost per pupil is Muncie Park School. It has close to 900 students, one building. So there's some relationship there between the sheer number of students. Right before I came to Seacliff Schools, the principal we had in the mid to high 400s in the population. Our schools are equipped and were built to hold a population of just over 3,000 students. We have a 2,500 population. We could easily absorb 500 students. To get to the cost per pupil in the same way by cutting, we'd have to cut 25 to 30 million. Again, not possible to run our schools with those amounts of cuts. So cost per pupil is educative, but we also want to put it in context and to help us make the right efficiencies. Same thing with the number of schools. And, here's another factor with, I'd say, Manhasset or Cold Spring Harbor, other districts that have 3 schools in the district. You see this in Westchester a lot too. If your building costs were, let's say, $4 or $5 million per building, and you had 5 buildings but fewer students, the per pupil cost is going to go up just by having fewer buildings housing the same or more students. That drives your per pupil down because of those fixed costs that are not as easily impacted by losing or gaining students. So there's an economies of scale that's built into, I'd say, at least half or 40 to 60% of the budget based on the numbers we're looking at. So where can you find efficiencies that are possible by looking at the number of students? Teachers, to align with what Mr. Jagone was saying, teaching assistants, aides, retirement and insurance that goes along with that, and programs offered. But that depends. For example, if we eliminated the IB program, IB history in 11th grade, 120 students. Those students need to go somewhere. It's not that we could just eliminate that. They would have to go to AP US history and have pretty much the same number of sections, the same FTEs. So it's not all programs, it depends. Likely eliminating a program like IB would save you a 0.2 of a social studies teacher, a 0.3 of a science teacher, a 0.4 of an English teacher. But what we need to do is find within a tenure area, as folks retire, or if we needed to access teachers, a 1.0 savings within the same content area. That's how we would find savings. Where other areas that we are looking at, supplies that are student population driven, field trips that we could look to compact and not eliminate, but make more efficient based on the number of students. And APIB tests. North Shore pays for all APIB tests for its residents, which is a very nice benefit in the high school budget. Now I'm going to look at a high school comparison. So comparing North Shore High School to Jericho High School and a few other high schools. So operating budget for North Shore High School is around $25 million. Jericho High School around $33.5 million. North Shore High School, 775 students. Jericho, 1,200 students. North Shore's cost per pupil is about $425. $4,300 more. And there's a smaller ratio, fewer teachers per student. And the teacher cost is a little lower than Jericho. Just to do the same kind of comparison that we did with Seacliff, to get North Shore High School to the same per pupil cost as Jericho High School with the current student population, that would require cutting 27.57 teachers, 27 to 28 teachers using that $120,000 salary. Just from that one school alone, again, I would make the same argument. It's not as devastating for a bigger school, but I don't see how we could run even a full basic English, science, math, and social studies program with that amount. We'd have course numbers in the 40s. It wouldn't be possible. So again, the limits of cost per pupil to look at to find some efficiencies, but that would be difficult to do. Total spending, North Shore and Jericho High School. If North Shore High School had the same number of students as Jericho High School, adding to the budget the number of teachers we would need and our cost per pupil of North Shore High School, just by simply having those 431 extra students would be less than Jericho High School. So again, there's a pattern to having the larger numbers. The cost per pupil will be less with all our existing programs and a lower student to teacher ratio, which is interesting. So that fixed number there's something there. I dug a little deeper into North Shore High School and Jericho High School and looked at the approximate teacher cost and the approximate non-teacher costs, again, using that $120,000 figure for salaries. And we see that North Shore High School spends a bigger portion of its budget on teachers, on the kids directly. And we saw that in Mr. Jagone's analysis, a lot of the reds, the underages, including transportation, were on the non-instructionals, meaning that the resources that we do have, we're putting towards our kids directly. Okay, so what do these comparisons show? One, Mr. Papson, I think it shows that non-instructional expenses tend to be fixed and cannot readily be decreased per pupil. Like I said, in a school of 1,000 versus a school of 800, you need one principal with the same number of principals. A lot of elementary schools in the comparison districts have assistant principals. We have no assistant principals in our elementary schools. Same number of custodians, security. You can't have 80% of a principal, 80% of electricity, 80% of clerical. You need the same numbers based regardless of the number of students. North Shore's non-instructional spending is already tight and efficient, and we use transportation as an example of that. With the same number of students as comparison schools, our schools would provide smaller classes and more programs at a lower cost per pupil if we just had more kids. Again, we're designed, part of our issue, besides LIPA, is that we're designed to hold more, and we've set up a structure that's set up for like 3,000 kids and not the 2,500 that we have right now. And that's why this is a challenge, and we're doing this analysis, because it's not as easy as saying pluck, 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 get rid of this, get rid of this, because we're not built that way. And so it is complicated. The only way to reduce per pupil cost is by cutting teachers, cutting programs, or making classes larger. Here's the concept applied to districts' size, to the ridiculously small Bridgehampton all the way out east at a cost of over $75,000 per pupil, Southampton, Locust Valley, Port Jefferson, and the North Shore. You can see there is some relationship between the amount of students in a district, the amount of buildings, and the cost per pupil. That's just by virtue of structure and number of students. And then I looked at some other high schools. Locust Valley High School, their cost per pupil of that high school is $10,000 more than North Shore High School. Cold Spring Harbor High School, about $10,000 more in that school as well. Same number of students, they spend $10,000 more per student. And Hewlett High School in Hewlett Woodmere spends about $5,000 to $6,000 more per student as well. And again, you see the correlation to the smaller populations of each of these buildings: 645, 775, 988 in Hewlett. One thing I do want to point out, and we'll talk about this as we go through our budget process, is that even though we're spending more per pupil, North Shore has a lower tax rate than all of these districts in green that spend less per pupil. So I'm not saying there's no connection, but it's not a clear connection between per pupil costs and taxes. So we are spending more on our students than each student than these other districts are for each student, but folks here are paying less taxes than those other districts as well. More spending on students and lower taxes. Okay, so conclusions. Schools with larger student populations naturally have a lower cost per pupil because of fixed costs and economies of scale that cannot be cut as school populations decline. You'd have to have a large enough decline to then make a structural change. Trying to match the cost per pupil of other districts would render our schools inoperable. I use that example of Seacliff School. Cannot cut 30 teachers to get to the same per pupil. In our estimation of just what we know, it's not just about electives and enrichment, it's about just classroom teachers. We wouldn't have enough classroom teachers for the children to go to. Class sizes are what brought many parents here. And when we've had community forums with parents, it's been a debate between small classes and Mandarin and things that our newest customers, our newest residents don't want to let go of. It would result in far less than what other districts offer. If we tried to approximate the cost per pupil of other districts, we would actually have a program that offers much less than those other districts because of the fixed costs really being a big part of the culprit here. North Shore's special education rate is higher, as Mr. Jagone said, something we've known. We are in the process of doing an internal review. We have met with external reviewers. We've reported to the board that we need to do an internal review first to find very specific areas. Our view is that an external reviewer would have given us very general information that we might already know. Classification rates, how we classify, why we classify is important. And we want to look into that, and that definitely relates to this finding. I do want to specify that 17% does not include students with a 504. If we include students with a 504 plan, the number jumps to about 24%. So that is a big number, a big percentage for our schools. We are proud of our special education program. We're proud to be a lighthouse district that offers great services. We're known for that. If that's the reason, I think that's a good reason for those percentages to be high. But if we're not doing enough work with pre-referral interventions, early interventions, non-mandated services at an early age, that's where we want to improve, because that's in the best interest of the child. It's not about saving money. A few more conclusions before we finish. Other districts' cost per pupil is rising as costs are rising each year for all districts, and few are making cuts. We're one of the few districts that are making cuts. We made cuts last year. We will have some cuts this year. That will be a discussion with the board and with the community. But you will see over the last couple of years, the budget-to-budget increases in other districts are much higher than North Shore. And so that per pupil spending, we believe, will catch up. It's a necessary thing we need to do because of what's happening with LIPA. So I think you're going to see the per pupil equalize because of what we're doing and finding efficiencies over time. Might not happen in 1 year, but between last year and this year, and as we get closer to that 2027 year, you should see a gap closing in terms of per pupil. Finding savings in class sizes and other program efficiencies, as highlighted in the report, is a way to move forward per pupil with per pupil cost in mind, but looking at it very specialized with a scalpel, not a hatchet, really looking at what makes sense to preserve the best experience for our students. And there is debate out there, and we will be having sessions with the community to talk about. Of course, our board will be talking about this over the next couple of months. Eliminating programs will not necessarily create savings. It depends on what program we're talking about. I use the example of IP history in 11th grade. All of those students need to find a home. So it's not just as simple as no more IB, no more AP, and we make the savings. No, we need to replace those sections so kids have places to go, so they have an honors history class in this case. Some of the parts of IB or other programs, that might not be as much the case. But even if an elective was eliminated, that's a period of 15, 20 students. They need to go somewhere, so we would need to figure that out, and that would cost staffing. North Shore stands to lose $8.4 million in the 27-28 school year. So that's exactly 3 years from now, from today, we'll be planning for that budget. We don't have definite information, more mountains of clarity that we need to cross with this, but we're getting increasingly more information that those properties in the LIPA deal with Nassau County will be generating very little or no power. And the county has said, past precedent, that the taxation or the direct assessment is based on the power generated, not on the land itself. So that means that we could lose a substantial portion. And even at the best case scenario, it would only be for 5 years. Of course, we need to work to find a real replacement for that revenue. We hope there will be development. We need to meet with our IDA in Nassau County, continue to meet with LIPA and with our elected officials. But my question before we finish is, how does that factor into decisions made now? For example, we've talked about Princeton planning. I think Mr. Dragone did such a good job of explaining how it works and how it could save us money. I would expect getting a lot of feedback on a plan like that, like he did. Our neighborhood schools in North Shore are so important, perhaps the most important reason why folks move here, because they are in separate neighborhoods. The one thing I would say about in the context of the 2027-28 school years is that something the community and the board wants to kind of hold on to as a concept for when we really need it, when we're really in a tough place to have somewhere to go. Point being, cutting so much right now could endanger the district in the long run if more cuts need to happen 4 or 5 years from now. Back to the three lenses: residents, parents, and students. The essential question is, how do we create the best possible experience for students while balancing the pressures of revenue loss, rising costs, and the impact on taxpayers? And the final questions that we need to focus in on as a community. I feel like a part of this community. I've worked here for a long time. We really come from a place of wanting to protect this place for the kids, protect this place for all the residents, try and find that right balance, which is hard to do, but it is not my community. It's your community. What do our parents and residents want to do to close the budget gap or not do? What does the future of the North Shore schools look like? What future does everyone envision? And to that end, we will be having listening sessions and discussion sessions before the budget is finalized. Normally, we have these coffee talks after the budget is adopted, and we start answering questions about what the tax levy is set at. We will be doing that, but we're first having, because of all these decisions and how high stakes this is, we are going to have 5 separate meetings in March with middle school parents, separate from high school parents, separate from elementary parents. We already had a community meeting on the calendar for late March, and we are having a meeting with business associations and groups as well to get all of these various perspectives that will inform both the administration, feedback we'll give back to the board, so we can make an informed 360 decision. Thank you. And I guess now at this point, we will take questions if the board wants to return. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for both of those presentations. Mr. Dragone, I had just like you said many interesting things, but there was one thing that you said that I just want to ask about before the trustees weigh in. And that was, you said something very nice. You said that you would be very proud for your grandchildren to go to school here. And I'm just curious why you said that.
I think that our children are our greatest resource. I'm very proud of my children, all 4 of them, who have gone into education, each one of them, much to the chagrin of my wife, who's in medical practice. She's a nurse. She wanted to at least get 1 doctor out of the group. But I've got a building principal, a school psychologist, a guidance counselor, and an associate director of operations at Hofstra University out of my 4. And I think that it's because of the outstanding education that they got in Northport. And I know that you offer a similarly outstanding educational program. To have school-wide enrichment, to have foreign language in the elementary schools, to have STEAM as an integral part of your elementary education, to have the IB program, which I was part of implementing in Rockville Center. We were one of the first districts that did that. All of those things are wonderful opportunities for kids. So that's why I said it.
Thank you. So I'll open it up to trustees. I see Vice President Kolisiopa chomping at the bit.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Dragone, for the report. And thank you very much, Dr. Zublionis, for your follow-up, which I really felt like gave context to the report, and that was really needed. I have to say, I listened to the presentation, I read through the draft report, and I think what I want to say is thank you to the North Shore community. This community has invested in itself, in our school district, in our children over and over for years and years. I want to thank the community for making the choice to keep our schools so successful. They have supported the programs the boards before us had the foresight to invest in, and it's paid off. Our small class sizes, our diverse class offerings, and our innovative programming have helped to rank us in the top tier of schools in our country. And that is no accident. It's the result of careful planning of prior and current administrations and boards, with input from parents, teachers, and community members. And like I'm sure most of us in the district, I've seen the value of my house increase exponentially. People move here for the well-reputed schools. If we continue to provide an award-winning education to our students, our investment will continue to pay off. While that becomes more challenging with the loss of LIPA tax dollars, I'm confident we can rise to the challenge. There are no big surprises in this draft report. While I found some inconsistencies in the report and I thought the broad statements, especially the recommendations, lacked context and specifics, it shows that there are no easy answers, no wasted dollars. Every dollar is accounted for and every dollar goes to the excellent programming this district offers. We already knew that our cost per student compared to larger neighboring districts was higher. We don't have the economies of scales that they have. And as Dr. Z indicated, if we had a couple hundred more students spread throughout the district, our cost per student would be significantly lower. We have lower cost per students than Locust Valley and Cold Spring Harbor. We have also made it a priority over the years to invest in programs that we value in offering robust services for our special education students. We should be proud that our identification rate is so much higher than our neighbors, and in offering a wide variety of electives so that each student can find their passion. We offer language learning in lower elementary school, and that decision was backed by data and analysis. Studies show that learning a language earlier is more effective than beginning later, and it enhances learning beyond language. I have heard many community members say that that was one of the reasons they moved to this district. And look at our seal of biliteracy numbers. We offer band and orchestra starting in elementary, STEM, SWES, a large number of athletic teams, and these programs serve our students well. And to some extent, without the economy of scales of the larger districts, they contribute to the cost per student. But these are conscious decisions our previous administrations, boards, and our community, via discussion and past votes, have made. The draft report showed that our salaries are in line with the other districts and that we spend less on transportation and facilities. Our previous administrations had the foresight to invest in our own bus depot, which saves the district money when compared to those districts that have to contract out bus services. I understand the financial impact recommendations from the increasing class sizes and cutting programs. If we were a manufacturing company producing calculators, this might make sense. However, this is a top-notch, award-winning, highly sought-after school district that many of us specifically chose to live in and to move to, including my family, because we knew our children would thrive in this district, exactly the way it has been for years. We want our children to have the wide variety of options that North Shore has provided to our students for many years. LIPA has changed the way our taxpayers are taxed. They are now faced with more of the burden that they were 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. But our tax rates are still lower than our neighboring districts. This means that we pay less in school tax per dollar in real estate value than neighboring districts. While our tax rates are starting to approach levels of our neighboring districts due to the loss of LIPA, and it is unfortunate for our taxpayers, I know we will, as we always do, look at every line of the budget and make values judgments on how we can make this tax shift easier for our community members. We will explore all prudent options to maintain our infrastructure and programs. We were able to install that turf field last year and the dance studio without increasing the tax levy. We can look at options like that as well. We always have both the students and the taxpaying community members at the forefront of every decision we make. However, doing something like a Princeton plan will destroy some of the fabric of what makes our district great. This alarms me. We have award-winning elementary schools because we invest in ensuring each elementary school has what it needs to be successful. We have a top-notch middle school and high school as well. The draft report showed that we had the highest college-level course passing rate of any of the districts we were compared to. We offer more and our students performed better. Going forward, my questions will be about how moving to a Princeton plan or cutting class sizes or cutting programs will affect the taxpayer. How much will we really save by taking these types of drastic measures? And what does that equate to for the average taxpayer? We will never be able to have the cost per student of larger districts like Jericho or Herrick's. The math just doesn't work. We will have some very difficult decisions to make this year and in the coming years where we will feel the effects of the loss of LIPA even more, but I know we can work together as a board and as a community to keep North Shore, North Shore.
Oh, who else? Nobody wants to go. All right, so we will start from, we go newest trustee to oldest trustee. We'll go oldest trustee to newest trustee, so everyone knows their order. Sorry. You're up, Marianne.
Hope you're not referring to my age.
No, I was very careful. I was very careful.
Oldest tenured
There are no birth
trustee.
certificates.
I was very
Oldest
careful.
length of service.
Well, I have a lot to say, so you might want to reverse the order.
Go ahead. You can go.
Okay, thank you for your report, Mr. Dragone. Just going through the report, when using your numbers, going to the Princeton plan would save $1,080,000. At the secondary level, it would be a $3.8 million savings if I'm using the $120,000 number. Is that correct?
I make clear that the saving $3.8 million at the high school does mean that you're going to be offering larger classes, fewer programs, because in order to get to the same number of students per FTE, you're going to have to decrease.
I understand that. I'm just following up on the numbers because no one said
Yeah,
what
the
the dollar amount of savings would be
The
in
estimate
total.
was that there would be 31 fewer teachers at the high school. Each teacher costs about $120,000, including benefits. So that would be about $3.8 million in savings if you could operate the high school with 21 students per class, per teacher, instead of your current 17 or 18. Yes, ma'am.
So let's talk about the IB program. You were using 4 as getting college credit. No college offers credit for a 4 on an IB exam. They just don't. So I think, it may be considered passing, but you're not getting college credit for it. And you can actually get a year of college credit with AP exams. And I happen to know that because I happen to have experienced it personally with my own children and with IB, that they did not get the same credits, right? I mean, and the passing rate that you gave on the scores, it's a double count, right? So if a student takes an IB exam and an AP exam and scores a 3 on an AP exam and a 4 on an IP exam, we've counted that twice, correct? Okay. On the IB, I don't know if you looked at, I looked carefully at the enrollment data that you provided. So I think the difference between IB and AP is that you don't necessarily have to offer the following course. So we've had several years, and I think it's right in this report, where we've had 3 students, 4 students in an IB course that we had to offer because it was part of the IB diploma program. So those courses could potentially be eliminated, and those teachers who are teaching 3 students, Mandarin Chinese, one year we had 1 student in it for IB, right? That teacher, that could be teaching a class with 20 students in it, 25 students in it, right? There's a number of them here.
That's correct. I think the challenge would be, and I've done this, and I can present that, in my updates, for that to equal an FTE within a subject area. Just because we've looked at this, because I'm, it could be, I could see like a 0.4 in world language or a 0.2 in science for IB physics too. It's hard to make it, I'm not saying it's not possible, but it would be hard to substantively have that add up to an FTE in each subject area. That would be the challenge.
That may be true, but the example of using a high enrollment number for an IB course is really misleading, because those same number of students would be in an AP course potentially, right? So you're not adding teachers, but what you would do if you got rid of IB to save money is you would be eliminating those very small class sizes for theory of knowledge, for continuum courses, for very low enrollment number courses, right? I mean, I don't think we can deny that there would be a savings. You would eliminate the continuing education that we keep doing for IB that is off location, right? So there would be savings.
Yeah, I think there would be. I think when we're looking at the kind of funds that we need to save here, I don't know if it would add up to a tremendous amount. But I will do that. I will crunch those numbers. In terms of the PD, a lot of that, there is still some of that. Granted, a lot of that is really been done now. It's not as like it was like when I had done that report for the board in 2019. But there would be savings. What I would want to get you more accurate information on is how substantive that would be in terms of accessing positions or finding like bigger. We're trying to think in like bigger chunks to get to the goal line. So that's all.
Right, but you could also then, if you have a teacher that was teaching an IB course, maybe you could have that teacher do an engineering course or a higher level calculus course. Some of the courses that we are really missing for kids who want to go to these elite colleges for engineering and STEAM related programs that are really disadvantaging our students in getting into certain universities.
On about two different issues, if I may. One is the IB program is wonderful. There's no doubt about it. It's a great program. It does give kids lots of opportunities. But having a teacher who's currently teaching IB teach instead engineering would not address the per pupil expense that you're talking about.
It would if you had that teacher teaching 20 kids. You're talking about opportunity costs for children. And I'm happy that you think the IB program is great. Different people can have different opinions about that.
For sure.
But I'm talking about savings, right? And we're talking about running classes with very, very low enrollment numbers. And listen, no one wants to disadvantage kids. What I'm trying to say is you could take those monies that you are saving and offer a course that would enroll more students, right? Because everyone, when you talk about cutting something, people think you're immediately disadvantaging students. What I'm saying is you can use that money potentially to create a greater advantage for more students. That's what I'm saying. So, the numbers don't lie, and we're running courses with very low enrollment for these continuing courses and for IB. So I just want to, I just want to make that clear that I understand these are difficult decisions, but I think there are nuances, just like you said, that are missing in these numbers. I think there's some editorialization that is not really correct. So I think that is something we really need to look at. What are we running at the high school that has small enrollment where we could possibly eliminate and offer a different course that would benefit more students? All right. On the facilities.
Could I just address the issue from a high school scheduling point of view? I think Dr. Z was making this point. I'd like to emphasize it a little bit. Those 20 students are going to come from other classes. So therefore, there will be teachers who are currently teaching not engineering, but maybe English literature as an elective, whose class won't run because those students will be going into the engineering class. And therefore, you'll have to eliminate a fraction of a teacher. The problem with eliminating a fraction of a teacher is that you will not be as attractive as a school district to high quality teachers if they aren't on a tenure track with seniority, getting benefits, etc. So that's a danger that you face in taking little pieces one at a time.
I'm willing to run that risk. I don't think we have any problem attracting qualified teachers in this district. I would say that the districts with lower cost for students don't have that problem either. So I just don't think that is, we're talking about the numbers here, right? Let's stick to the numbers. The facilities. So transportation. You said we had lower costs for transportation, but elsewhere in your report, you said we had a higher workers' comp cost because of transportation. We had higher deferred benefits cost. I didn't see any accounting here for the cost of building and maintaining the facilities and the loss of those funds. So I'm wondering, when you did the transportation costs, did you include those additional costs such as the workers' comp, the deferred benefits cost and pension?
Separately, because the accounting system does separate into its own category what they call undistributed expenses, which is employee benefits. And those are lumped together for all categories of employees, not just transportation.
So that's correct, right? So then we don't really know if the transportation cost is lower by having our own transportation facility, because we're not capturing those numbers, are we?
You're capturing them as a benefit that is more expensive in North Shore than it is in other districts, yes.
Right, but you're not capturing it in the transportation, is my point. You're not comparing apples to apples in the transportation number. And food service, I think that is, looking at that number, I think that's a number that we're going to have to look at if there's some economies we can't get there. Okay.
With regard to the food service, there was a mention of a $150,000 transfer that was sent over in 2023. Prior to that, we had not sent any funds over to the school lunch fund. That was coming out of COVID. It did have a loss for that 2021-22 year, and that was sent over there. It was not placed in the budget for this current year, and weren't looking to put that in the budget for next year. It was just a 1 year where we were covering a deficit coming out of COVID. That being said, we have an amazing school lunch program, and it is expensive with farm to table and other things. So at some point we may have to look to subsidize it in some fashion, but we have not. That is not a regular transfer that is done to the school lunch fund on a
Because I know
regular
they're
basis.
supposed to be self-sustaining.
Yes.
All right. So on the workers' comp, it was interesting to me to see the lower number for people who work for districts that have participated in the cooperative bid. I think that is something we definitely should talk about. I'm going to tell you that I do. Did you want to answer that, Jamie? I know in your report you said you started to look at that.
I did, and I have reached out to the president of the cooperative. In the initial years, it would be more expensive to switch to the cooperative, as I spoke to him, because they cover. It would basically be like you're self-insured, but through the cooperative. And the individual said that in every district where he's moved into the cooperative, initially it was more expensive, but what you do get out of that is you don't worry about the peaks and valleys in terms of your workers' comp. It would be maybe a higher number than we currently have budgeted, but we wouldn't have to worry about drawing upon the reserve. Every case that we have prior to that, the reserve, we would need to keep the reserve because they will only cover you from, if we did it as of July 1st, 2024, they won't cover any past claims. So we would still have that reserve that we'd have to utilize, but it would prevent the peaks and valleys, not necessarily be less expensive, but we would be sheltered from big changes from one year to the next.
Thank you. So I just want to talk a minute about some of these, about the foreign language program and about some of the broad stroke statements. So the foreign language program, we've looked at the schedules, right? You've provided the schedules. If you wanted to keep the elementary foreign language program, is there a way to reduce the number of teachers? Because I know with our music program, we have reorganized it. We have teachers traveling from building to building, our STEAM program. There has to be a way to utilize this more efficiently, because you just can't afford 6 foreign language teachers at the elementary level with the amount of free time.
I was just going to use the library as a quick example. That's kind of how we're looking at this. Like, in that case, we had a retirement, so we were able to look at schedules and find some efficiencies there. I think we want to look at it in that way that you described, and look at the whole K through 12 world language program, because I think we've heard community input on the whole program. And so, the assured experience at the elementary level versus electives at the higher level, because it's K through 12. Another way we've thought of this is secondary teachers also working at the elementary level, to your point. So I think we kind of want to look at the whole system and see how we can kind of keep it intact more efficiently.
So that sort of, let me first address the foreign language, and then I want to address the broader thing I was going to say about the deployment. So I was very happy. Let me go back to the librarian first, when you did that, because I was going to bring it up to you, that the librarians had a lot of free time, right? Because we reduced the number of library periods when we put in foreign language in the schedule. So that was one of my things. But it brings me, on the foreign language program, I think you really have to look at having 5 options. Because what you end up doing with the 5 options is, when you get to the higher levels, you're running multiple classes with very low class size, right? What they did in the past is they would put the AP students in with the level like 4 or 5 students. So they would combine them, and there were 2 kids in AP Latin the year Katie took it, right? But they didn't get their own class. They got a class with the other kids, right? And they just did more work basically they did more work on their own for the AP exam. But if you had if you went from 5 to 3, you may get some efficiencies, because you may be running classes, especially as you get up higher, with more student enrollment, right? So I think we do have to look at that program and look at how we can do it more efficiently, because I don't think that we are as the population keeps dwindling, you're having less and less kids. I looked at Latin, that you had 7 kids in Latin. I mean, I love Latin. It was great. Both my kids took it, but I'm a realist, right? At some point, you can't afford to be running classes for 7 kids. Not when you're looking at an $8 million deficit. So I really, and that's not something I've been talking about this. I've been talking about this for years, right? And I've said repeatedly, we should have been proactive. We need to be proactive, because you can't tell a sophomore in high school that you're not offering their foreign language next year, right? That's not fair either. So I think it's something we have to look at.
I was going to say, yeah, I think with some of these sequences, like Mr. Dragon said, including IB itself, you'd have to cycle out, anything. If you were going to make a change, there's a necessary delay. There's an obligation to let students finish, or in any program that we're talking about, whether it's world language or something else. I do think one concept that we've talked about as a team, administrative team, is pathways within each subject area, and how are we using those resources to have robust programs, whether it's world language or what we're doing with STEAM and computer science, how we're using time. So I do think, like we said last year, a lot of those budget conversations can happen in connection with the program discussions to build robust. Business is another thing. As we have teachers retire, we know there's an increased student demand for business. How do we carve that out of perhaps a position that becomes open so that we do it in an efficient way. So it's also, what your point made me think of is what students are selecting, business, certain languages, certain engineering courses, and how that drives, what we do also.
Right. So, what I think really needs to be done, and this is kind of more what I pictured, and I know it was Mr. Dragone's charge when I first brought this up, is what I think almost needs to happen is we need to do a building by building audit. Because I think there's some positions that, like the librarians, that could be consolidated. You have computer aides that were for computer rooms that don't exist anymore, right? I think we do have to look at the other layers of administration. We brought in literacy coaches, and I know we had a little back and forth on this with Teachers College. We've reduced the 3 to 2, but they're not really directly in the classroom. I think that is somewhere where we have to look at down the road. Is that a cost-efficient use of our time? Would we be better bringing in an outside consultant for a position like that? But I feel like you almost have to go building by building, look at every employee from the top down, job description. What are they doing? Is there a way to do it more efficiently? Is there a way to combine some of those positions? Because we're at a critical juncture. You don't want to, I understand and I agree, you don't want to negatively impact the education, but there are a lot of areas that people who work in the buildings will come up to me and say, do you know X, Y, and Z? And that's really where a lot of my questions come from, right? Or parent or community members. Because I don't know what goes on necessarily in one building, and I probably don't need to know, right? But we do need to understand, we need to audit these buildings, we need to audit the personnel, we need to see where there are potential efficiencies. And you know what? Maybe it's a $200,000 administrator position, or maybe, unfortunately, it's an aide or a monitor's position. But all those savings, they may not be enough to get us home, but they are a savings, and it's our obligation, especially in this environment, to look at to look at where we can save those dollars. And I really think it has to come almost from like a human capital review, like a KPMG does. But if we could do it internally, all the better. But at a minimum, that has to be done. I do want to talk about real estate values because, I'm just going to tell you, I do real estate closings every freaking day. And the cost of real estate everywhere has increased exponentially. And without any data here, there is absolutely no data here that would say that the real estate values in North Shore went up higher than any other community. I can tell you I closed something in Herrick's for over $1 million that I wouldn't put my cat in. I'm just going to say that it's just not, it's an editorialization without any factual basis or any analysis.
Yeah, and I think the point I made in my presentation was the tax rate per 100,000, that is, that's fact, that's set by the county, and that is lower than a lot of districts for the value of the house.
The other thing I wanted to say is that when you're looking at someplace like Locust Valley, that is also an IB school, so that could contribute to its cost. Rockville Center actually mandates IB. Everyone has to take IB in Rockville Center, and they have a K-12, which then eliminates the problem of having classes with 4 kids in them.
Actually, Locust Valley does that too, which I was surprised about. I was looking at the catalog in December, and as we're looking at AP and IB, it's actually the only choice. There are like 2 or 3 AP classes. I was surprised by that. Always knew that about RVC, but that is the case actually in Locust Valley too.
So, I mean, it goes back to my point with IBAP. I don't really care which program you offer, but I think you really have to figure out what we're doing and what our identity is and do something well, because I don't think we do either well. But that doesn't go to dollars, but it will go to dollars if you look at it and you get greater enrollment in one type of course. I think there's a lot of duplication in the courses that there's not enough differentiation to, offer them.
Say one
Yes.
quick thing on that. Since we really couldn't end it like at this moment anyway, something like IB or AP right now, I think I would like, and I'm not denying, I don't know. I want to do an analysis of possible cost savings, but I would recommend we separate that out of the budget discussion. I know we did a study with Kerry Titone, but one thing I have not done and I feel an obligation to do is to really engage our faculty in conversations about the future of the high school in general, not just about AP and IB. So I think I would recommend that we do another full presentation on that in the future.
That's fine. It's just, it was in the report.
Yeah,
So-
that was just an opportunity for me to say that. Sorry.
Okay. I do want to talk a little bit about the battery storage facility that is going in where LIPA is. I think that is an opportunity for us to plead in with Nassau County that property should be assessed differently. I think battery storage plants should be deemed as revenue generating, power generating facilities and taxed as a energy generating facility. And I think that is someplace that we should be looking at I know we've brought it up in LAC, but it's definitely something we should be looking at in LAC to get those properties reassessed as power generating facilities and put right back on those tax rolls.
In very recent conversations that I've had with the utilities directly, they have told me that battery storage developers are looking for communities that are open to development. And there are some communities that are scared of it, that have been less welcoming in Suffolk County because of fears. We have properties down there already. And from my information, from my conversations and some research I've done, we do need to do more research on what you're referring to down there, but I think there are possibly other opportunities out there that we should seek out by directly engaging with those developers.
I'm not saying that we should seek it out. What I am saying is that we know that there are some planned battery storage facilities, right? It hasn't really come to fruition yet.
Right.
But
right.
it's in the works.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be on top of that, because if they are going, just like we have to be on top of ADAs, because if they're coming in here, they need, and then we're being exposed to that again, they need to pay their fair share of the bill.
No, and I was just adding on that I've been in my research told that, we should, having a community conversation about it, if there's consensus, to then communicate that out can open that door. And then there's, of course, part 2, the IDA pilot tax abatement avoidance issue. Yep.
Yep. The other thing I just want to say is that, my kids went through the district during the big, the big boom, right? We were literally teaching music in the broom closet. And I'm not recommending that. But what I will say is that we've had many successful students go through here with elementary class sizes. I'm not saying we should have 30 kids in a class. I mean, but, 20, 23, 24, somehow they manage to read and write. And, if that's what it takes to do this, then we have to look at that. And I think we really have to look at the Princeton plan in terms, even now, I'm not saying it has to be done now. I know it would be unpopular. Everyone loves their neighborhood school. You would have the advantage of consolidating some of your special ed services. You would have the advantage of all the kids starting together. There are many of our neighboring districts that utilize the Princeton plan, Locust Valley being one of them, Glen Cove, Great Neck, Bayshore does it, I think, right? There's a number of them out there that have very, very successful results. I think you'll have to look at the total package and I think you have to add in the additional transportation costs and come up with a real number, because I don't think talking about it in a vacuum, whether to do it or not, makes sense. I think you really have to get hard numbers of what that would look like and what the savings would be. Would we be able to close a school, for instance? That would be, and rent it out. That would be a savings and income. Would we be able, how many teaching positions would we really eliminate? I think it's sort of going back to what you said, when you eliminate a course, does that really give you one position? And I don't think you can estimate those numbers when you're talking about something like the Princeton plan. I don't even think you can present that to the community without having an understanding of a real hard understanding of those numbers, because that would be incredibly unpopular, I think. But if there were a real significant savings, maybe it would be worthwhile. If we think there would be other benefits, maybe we think it would be worthwhile. But I think talking about these numbers abstractly just doesn't talking about something like that in an abstract doesn't make sense without having the real data.
David? Trustee Ledmar?
Let's see where I want to begin. Thank you for this report. Thank you, administration. I want to thank someone I didn't really plan to talk about, but Vice President Colasiope, I thought you really encapsulated how, what our district's about. And I thought your words were really, really thoughtful and good framing for this. I too kind of want to talk a little bit, or start at least, taking a step back and thinking about how we got here, which is the idea of doing this independent review. There was a call for this. We know for years we've had a higher cost per student ratio by any metric than many, certainly not all, but many of our neighboring school districts. And that question of why is out there. We did an analysis a few years ago internally, which talked about a lot of these things: class sizes, our offerings, the unique aspects of our programs, the number of buildings, certainly compared to some other ones. And I think that one of the concerns that I had at least, was that we would engage in a firm that was a numbers-only firm and not one that understood the value of education. As someone with an MBA, I know what that looks like, and I know how that works in business. I'm a business owner, and I would hesitate to bring one into my own operation, even though I know there'd be benefits, because you really have to understand an organization to know what makes it tick. And so bringing on Mr. Dragone with his educational experience was certainly a huge, was what allowed me to go ahead and feel comfortable voting for this, and that we were going to be doing an analysis of something with the sensitivity to the fact that at the end of the day, as our Vice President mentioned, this is about children. And even in your presentation, you talk about the 70% of our residents who don't currently have students in the buildings. When I go around here, yeah, there are some who sort of said, I'm done using, so I'm ready to be done paying. I think most people recognize I'm not going to go so far as a pay it forward or communitarian values, but I do think that they recognize that if my children had a superlative North Shore education, it really doesn't seem right to take that away from today's students, or to change the basic nature and character. Because I think whatever you say, I think whatever anyone says about the specific numbers, and I agree with Trustee Russo, it is certainly very hard to quantify the relationship between the success of a school district and the property values within that school district. I do think that anecdotally, if you talk to any realtor, that's why people are moving here. That's what makes our place desirable. And as someone who's lived here for getting close to 20 years now, it's something that I've come to appreciate all the other aspects of this district. And I did move here without children as an almost newlywed, but certainly the schools are where it's at. So that was my goal going into this. I thought about a study we did several years ago when I was first on the board. We commissioned a demographic study and a utilization of our buildings. And we got the study. I remember reading it on the train going into the city for something, reading it a few days later and saying, this study really isn't giving us anything that we need that is helpful to us as a district. And so we looked and we commissioned a different study. And it was the second one was done by BOCES, and it was excellent. And we had a fantastic discussion. It was in the high school. I still remember it. And I still remember asking those questions. And because of the quality and depth and the nuance and the specificity of that study, it enabled us to truly understand the groundwork from which we were looking to either maintain the status quo, cut back, and or grow. For example, that utilization rate led us to see, based on birth rates and based on what was going to happen, that this building we're sitting in right now was the one that was going to have the highest population and need the most improvement. And we were able to tailor our bond work specifically for that. And now that we have these bubble classes again in, I believe it's 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grades, well, it might be 6th, 7th, and 8th, and 9th. Time flies. But those middle school years are very popular, and we were prepared for it by having that. And so that's really just my intro, sorry. But it is the context from which I want to approach this. I want to have this report be able to give us the framework from which we can have the kind of meaningful decisions going forward to make sure that our district can survive, not just for the students, but also for the taxpayers who are experiencing that shift. You didn't mention the specific number today, although it's one that I think is worth coming back to. That 20 years ago, residents were paying 54% of the tax burden, and now they're at 84%. That is a huge, huge shift. Is the fact that we were at 54% 20 years ago one of the reasons I ended up here? Absolutely. And now that I'm paying more, that's been certainly a change that I feel in my wallet, in my checkbook. Although, as you also pointed out, with parents who still live in Syosset, I also see what they've had for all that time, and they're paying much, much more in taxes for home value. So with that, I kind of wanted to get into some details of the specific report. I'm going to glance over the first one because I think you already mentioned it, but in terms of improving the health of this report, I think Cold Spring Harbor and Locust Valley would make sense if we could possibly expand the scope to include them. They're more in our size range. They are more in our cost range. I believe Cold Spring Harbor has 4 buildings. I think Locust Valley, has 6 buildings, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. Is it? I went on the website to try to look. I'm not sure. I think there's 2. There's a Bayville. I think there's a Bayville Middle and a Locust Valley Middle. They both funnel into the high school, but one may be on the same campus. I'm not exactly sure.
The elementaries are on different campuses, but they're on the Princeton plan, and then the middle school and the high school are one building.
Okay, so I think that would be a good one to look at because of the cost. They're actually, nominally more. But I also wanted to come back to the question of cost per student. In the report, I certainly was somewhat troubled, and I understood why you do it, why you went this direction, and certainly your explanation tonight made sense of why we went with the quote-unquote back of the envelope calculation, which is the total cost divided by the number of students. And I would say that esoteric, maybe a little strong, but I think that this board, I know for sure, has an appetite for the nitty gritty and the details and making our decisions to really come up with a true number, and has spent a lot of time working with the community that I think is also largely interested. There's some people who want to use those numbers as cudgels, we understand, but for the most part, this community is interested in the real numbers to be able to compare apples to apples. And so there are some things, for example, I wasn't sure. Again, the words of the report where you use, quote, the much simpler calculation of expense per pupil, which is the one most commonly used by taxpayers. Total expenditures in the general fund, the fund supported by property taxes, divided by the total number of students enrolled in the school district. We have a couple unique things here. I think of them as unique. I don't know, but if we're doing a comparative study, I'd like to know if they're unique. For example, we have St. Christopher's School that costs, I think this year's budget, about $600,000 that is recognized on the expense side. We're reimbursed on the revenue side, but that of course changes the calculation because it's included there. I don't know if other districts have situations like, if the specific target districts have things like that.
As an example,
Okay,
has St. Mary's,
okay,
and a number of children attend St. Mary's that live in Manhasset, but also a number of children who live in North Shore attend St. Mary's in Manhasset. And Manhasset is reimbursed by North Shore for some of the special services they provide to North Shore students at St. Mary's.
yeah, district of residence, district of location.
There
So
are
I-
those
yeah.
nuances. You're
So
right.
I think one of those nuances I think could strengthen the report because we have Greenvale, we have other facilities in our district, and I know we fund those as we're required, but I'd like to know how that compares to the other ones. The transportation management facility, I think, is also one that's probably recognized as more of an expense, even though we service other districts' buses, we bring in revenue from there. I'm not sure if that's recognized in the same way that does expand that expense side.
I did nothing with revenue. I only did expense because that was my charge.
But that expense used by that number, I mean, there's, in our district, and you may not be as aware of this as some of us who, deal with the nitty gritty of this here specifically all day.
I'm very aware of it. Olivia used to charge me a ton of money to bring my Roslyn buses to this shop to get repaired. Yes.
I mean, I hope we're still friends, but I was arguing for more, so. It still seemed like you're like, getting a good deal, but it's a separate issue. But I do think that in terms of the nitty gritty of how people use that number, I think is a really important part of this report that I would like to see maybe a more nuanced one. The school lunch program, for example, I think it was mentioned that 150 was a one-time thing. So I think that's one example. There was, let's see, some of the areas where it was like legal fees. We're high in one area but lower in the other area. That does throw off people's understanding of these things in ways that I think we could be prepared for folks to say, oh my gosh, you're spending so much more than this, even though in the other area it's not. So I think some of those areas where, due to the budget codes we use, it really does offset and we're really in the same place. It might be helpful to group those in the report in a way that makes it more comprehensible to people who are reading them.
The problem with that is that from an accounting point of view, there are all sorts of traps that I could fall into. For example, school psychologists, they spend a lot of time with special needs students. Should I make a judgment as to the money that's spent in 2820, which is the function for school psychologists, and say, well, a portion of that should be charged to 2250? Similarly which is special ed. Similarly, with your legal services, you budgeted under 1010-420 for your legal services because you were directly involved in litigation over LIPA. So you pay, as a Board of Education, which is 1010, you segregated those costs so that you could explain to the community, hey, our legal costs are high because the Board of Education is involved in litigation, as opposed to every other district which used 1420, the function, which is legal services, and then 420 for contract legal services. So there is, and I don't know how much of that money I should return to 1420, how much of it, unless I got really into the weeds. And I think in the long run, what you really want to do is you're going to have to, as a Board of Education, you're going to have to reach consensus and then sell that to the community, which is why I chose, rather than using AOE per TAPU, I chose expenditures per pupil because they do track each other pretty well.
One of the things, I think, in response to your first question, or first comment, I think that parsing what a psychologist does is probably beyond the scope of this report, what they do with their day. But I think that lumping legal fees is probably a little easier. So potentially going through and seeing where those areas that have more facility to be able to do that.
Out. The reason why the Board of Education looks like it's spending a heck of a lot of money is because you've put your legal fees in the Board of Education function as opposed to the 1420, which is the legal function.
Which makes sense. And I think that actually ties into my second comment about something you just said, which is I don't really agree with the fundamental concept that we as a board have to figure out what the right direction is and then sell it to the community. I think historically where we've been best here at North Shore is when we as a community can have a conversation together, and the board reflects that. And so this working draft document, I think, to be a better tool to reach that community understanding and consensus, can make some of those adjustments to make it more, again, make it more comprehensible to folks who do want to be engaged in this process. I think, Dr. Z, you had a budget meeting the other night. You had 50 people on the call, and I heard it was great, and I had really good feedback from that. Those are 50 folks who want to understand what's going on. Some of them probably just want to see, who's our superintendent? They're and I appreciate that you offered it in that format. But I think there are a lot of people on there who want to be engaged in this conversation, so we can come together as a community, because it was mentioned here, the idea of community schooling and how important that is. We're unified, Free Union School District number 1. They brought together these very disparate communities here, and we're all under that one North Shore heading. And so having that conversation among all of these different communities that, we're all North Shore, we go out there and we're all going to root for these, for these basketball teams and the track teams and all the rest of it. But we come from different places. And so I think that being able to have that, give people a tool to be able to do that, I think that's key. I appreciate that you talked about the salaries really are commensurate with our neighbors. I think that's really important. I think it's very easy to pillory teachers. Oh, they're getting paid too much. Now we know they're getting paid on par with our neighbors. And quote, the median salary of classroom teachers in North Shore Central School District is in line with the salaries in the other 4 target districts. I wasn't sure how that related. I thought this was a potential, I don't know how deep, if this is really within this, or if you could do this. But I think that median salaries is one thing, but I think understanding where we are on the lane and step continuum could be helpful also. One of the things that was mentioned in the previous comparative study was that we had a faculty that was much closer to that MA 75 level. And I don't know if Perex and Jericho are in those places, and I don't know, that's potentially a big project, but I think that would be helpful to understand, because certain, and that's related to salary to some degree. But if our median salary is, I don't want to throw out a number, but let's say it's X, and then we found out that, well, we're a bunch of newbies here, and really we're headed toward 1.2X versus headed, or the other end, and we're going to end up at 0.7X. That would be helpful, I think, as well. So that might be an area to potentially strengthen some of the information in there. I know this is beyond the specific data in this report, but all the special ed stuff, some of it made me kind of uneasy. I hope there wasn't the implication that in any way we are, and we'll study this when we do the study, that we are over prescribing services, or that somehow because we're at 16.5% that we're just doing things that don't need to be done. I don't want to speak in any way negatively about districts that are at much lower numbers, but the populations, as we all know from math and stats, fall into the same standard deviation for the most part. And so I'm not going to say that any of those populations are being underserved, because I wouldn't know that. And even if I did, that would be ridiculous of me to say from up here. But I don't want to give the impression that we are over serving in some way, unless that's what you think.
Oh, I have really no idea. I can only tell you that approximately 17% of the children, 24% if you include 504 identified children, are identified. And it is very possible that people are moving to North Shore with children with special needs because of the outstanding special education program that you're offering.
I don't know that.
That's a possibility. Another possibility is that you're providing services beyond what is mandated, which is a wonderful thing to do.
That would be helpful. I think the part of that community conversation would be, do we want to, not be able to offer it? Do we want to offer, the bare minimum for some of these kids and say, look, we just can't afford to go anywhere beyond what we think is best for these kids? That's a conversation the community can have. And if there's only 30% of the community has kids in school in general, and 16% of that 30% are the ones who have students who are classified, well, again, that's going to be a conversation for this community, whether they think it's important to help support and fund those kids that aren't theirs in a way that will affect those kids' lives. The cost of having all-day ICT is not really mentioned here, the way we service our kids, but that certainly has to be a reason why we have a lower faculty-student ratio. The co-taught classes that, as far as my understanding, and Dr. Smythe has certainly presented this to us, I'll just say many, many times, is that benefits both those students and the general population as well. And that's something that I think is a core value of ours. And although I was planning to end with this, I have a few more things to say, but I do think it's a good point at this point to mention those core values still should be what's driving this as a community and the value we place on these things. That yes, I don't disagree that this report certainly showed a lot of what Marianne, Trustee Russo talked about, which is that some of those sections and some of those classes and some of those offerings may not be feasible. And a range of 15 to 21 at the elementary level may make more sense at a range of 17 to 23 or whatever that window is. But those discussions have to be led by what's best for our students. And if we were in a situation where financially we simply can't afford to do what's best for our students, I don't personally think we're at that place. I don't think we're going to have to be at that place. I think that's a false choice. The question of how we get there is what we're doing here. But I still think it has to be guided by those values. A class that is core to our program, getting rid of STEAM at the elementaries, and we were just voted one of the best STEAM education districts in the state. Maybe I don't remember what it was, but very, very highly ranked. Cutting back on the athletics offerings when we know that, we offer a lot of sports. And this cross-country team is not a giant team, but it's a very big team. We have some teams that are half that size. But if those teams weren't running, we have to think about, for the cost savings of what that would mean, what's going to happen to those 9 or 10 kids? What are they going to do? And is what they're going to do at these quote unquote tender ages of 13 to 17 going to set them on a different path than if we were able to offer, a lower enrollment sport? I'm not going to say what they are, but we kind of know what they are. Alternatively, coming up with a badminton, I can name that one, but maybe many, many, many people will play as a growth area. So this is how you adjust those things. But a lot of those things you mentioned in the report, and I understand the nature of the report was not to tie costs of those things. It was to give ideas and identify areas that the administration could then use. Sorry, Jamie, you're going to be on the hook for costing everything. But although luckily you have the great skills to do that, so thank you. But that's the charge after this as the follow-up. Sorry.
I just wanted to assure you and the board that, we've already started looking at pieces because the draft budget needs to come to you, and we're really starting with that view of what will impact students the least. and we're looking at things like supplies. And I know Mr. Jago made the comment about paper clips. That's true. But there are a lot of non-instructional items that we're working with directors and principals on to get to a certain point so that any staffing implications would be less. So that we are definitely starting from that, but we appreciate the reminder and the charge.
Just in finishing up the recommendations, Princeton plan is certainly one that, is worthy of consideration. I think Mary Ann mentioned the idea of, if we're really, there should be no sacred cows in this process. If it really made sense to close a school, and I'm not going to name a school, but theoretically we see the numbers, then that would be something that I would like to have the administration recommend to us to say, well, this is where we're going to be. Those of you, Chris, I know you worked in Syosset, and Mr. Dragone has certainly been around long enough to, I don't know if you remember, when I was in elementary school in that district, they went from, I'm going to say roughly 11 or 12 elementary schools to about 7 or 8. I went to something called Split Rock School which closed when I was in 5th grade, and then I went to Berry Hill for a year. We had 6th grade in elementary back then, as long as we're talking about our ages.
Here.
Yeah, exactly.
When I was first here, we had it here.
So it was about that.
I'll tell you, I was the last 6th grade in England Head School. It was 1990.
Yeah, I was the first 9th grade in the Syosset High School, which was 86, 87 maybe. And then it's not a secret. I'm 51, sorry. But I also know that after they did that, I was in portable classrooms. And it didn't have that, and I was bused, and there was a lot of that change. And I recognize that may have to be a decision that is recommended. But with the Princeton plan, the research I did is that it isn't really prevalent on Long Island too much. And the amount, we talk about transitions, the amount of transitions and the learning loss or the learning pauses that happen during those transitions, again, would be the academic drive for potentially saying it doesn't make sense. I am not saying that we have the perfect program as it is right now, and nothing can change. I recognize we're in this situation. We have to adapt to it, and I love that your eyes are also looking toward 27, 28, which is an even bigger mountain of uncertainty. If there's a mountain there, right? Could be, who knows what's behind those clouds. But it is there. And so we're going to have to make some changes, some adjustments. But we have to do it in a way that is preserving what's so great about the district. And I think with that, I had a few more comments, but I'm probably going to let it go at that point. And I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. Steve Galati.
Thank you very much for the presentation and for the work that was done to put it together. Much of what I had in mind has actually been stated already, but there are just a couple of things. This whole situation is daunting, and for me personally, because of the life that I've lived, is very upsetting. Because some really difficult choices are going to have to be made. And they're not going to necessarily be popular, but we have to make decisions that are going to be as beneficial as possible for our student body. And I think, as was mentioned tonight, some of the ideas were thrown out. And I really do think we need to look into them more seriously, have more empirical data to work with. Some of the points that were brought up tonight, I agree with you, the business of the APIB. You know where I stand on that. I don't have to say any more. It's just that I think the way that it was presented with the 120 students in the history, it's more complex than that. I think that was an oversimplification of really what the situation is. And I do feel that looking seriously at how programming is done can really end up in some significant efficiencies. The other piece that I was hearing, and maybe I misheard, but when we look at certain things and it's like, well, that's really not going to impact it. And that's not, Well, everything that we do is going to impact the situation. And I am under no belief whatsoever that we can fix this right away. This is going to take a lot of time and a lot of thought, and it's going to have to take baby steps. But I think we need to start making those steps. And I think by doing a presentation like we did tonight, 100% we needed to do this. But I think now what we need to do is move forward and look really seriously at some of these recommendations and some of the implications to see exactly what the downsides would be and if there are downsides. I mean, because we do, by and large, I think we do a good job here. And does that mean we can't do a better job? No, certainly not. We're always trying to do a better job, but we may be able to do things a little bit differently that we're not familiar with right now, that we're not comfortable with right now, that aren't necessarily going to be bad. And I think part of it is we're so used to the way things are here. And yes, we progress, but I got to tell you, the back of the envelope calculation, that's part of the reasons I came here. Because in 1985, when I was hired, when I was deciding where to come, the North Shore schools had the highest per pupil spending of any school on Long Island. So this is the history of this place. But the difference is, back then, the burden wasn't on the back of the taxpayers. So we got used to this environment, and why wouldn't you? I mean, it was beneficial to the students, it was beneficial to the community, but things have changed now. So unfortunately, I think we need to look at this a little more critically. Obviously, there isn't a single person sitting up here who wants to cut anything. No, none of us want to. And I'm not saying that we necessarily have to make major cuts. I think there are ways to work through some of these things, but it's not going to be easy, and that's the frustrating part of it. And no matter what you do, Dr. Zublionis, you are not in an enviable position, because no matter what decisions are going to be made, you're going to have critics, no matter what it is. So I think what you need to do is what you have been doing. You need to look at this with open eyes and keep moving forward and trying to figure out, again, even if it's just in small steps, how are we going to do what we need to do with the resources that we have? Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Maria.
Go ahead. Before you go,
Yes, please.
I'm reminded of a lesson that I learned from rocketry, that when you're trying to go to the moon, if you make a very small adjustment in the beginning of the flight, it'll be thousands of miles by the time you get to the moon. So your analogy about making small steps now is really important to keep in mind. You can't put this off. You can't put it in the sack behind your back and say, we'll worry about it in 27, 28. So I think you're absolutely right. You need to start taking small steps now so that you avoid the cliff in 27, 28.
Okay, I'm right in the middle of the longest serving and the newest, right? Okay. Mr. Dragone, thank you so much. I think that you set an incredible stage for Dr. Z's sort of surprise postscript that was an incredible 1-2 punch. And I'm really grateful to both of you. But I did have to, I can't resist saying that AOE over TAPU, just what we needed, some more acronyms. We have, I thought education topped the list of, industries that loves jargon, and now we get the accountant's jargon on top of it. So So I want to, I do have some general comments to make. I'm delighted, as Trustee Galati pointed out, that I was able to go through my own notes and cross out the vast majority of them. But I will make some comments at the end. I'm going to reverse the order and the way from what, for instance, Trustee Ludmar did. I want to get nitty gritty, cellular level. It's the way I have to approach looking at these kinds of reports. It's just, I can't get my overview until I've, played around with some of the calculations and really understood them. So I have also even crossed off quite a number of those. So those questions are relatively short, and then I'll make a few more comments. You did mention, I thought I heard you say in your commentary as you were giving us the presentation that the very first, in presenting your thesis at the very top, presenting the point that there's no doubt the report supports that our expenditures are higher than than the comparison districts. That very first grid that you give, showing us at roughly 40 and the others going down from there. You said, I think, that in your presentation that is in fact a reflection of the AOE over TAPU. So I'm a little confused by it. Just the way that, I just want to clarify the way the data is presented and make sure I'm understanding. So the bottom line figure, the total per pupil cost here, is the result of an AOE over TAPU calculation, but Vistar enrollment is 2519. We don't see then really that's not really the data that went into this. The data that went into this is a different number that's the weighted TAPU, right? I'm just trying to sort of understand what I'm looking at here. I think rather than make you get into the weeds with me right now on it, what I want to do is just use this as an example, referring back to what Trustee Ludmar said. I think that if the report is going to have a final version and goes through a little bit more editing and works based on the comments you're hearing tonight, that the context in general, the idea of putting things in this context as we're looking at them would be really, really helpful. And I would love to see in these cases where you're showing us these reams of data, for each grouping, it would just be very helpful to see what exactly is the calculation or in some cases also where you're showing us the North Shore per person above the average, the variation above the average. Sometimes you're showing us the difference, but you're not showing us the average. That I would love to just see a few more of the steps. It would just help the geek head sort of feel better about.
Sorry, forgive me, but the reason why you're seeing, I have in the spreadsheet that I used, I have the gross amount, the number of pupils, the average for each district, but I hid those columns in the hope that I wouldn't put you to sleep in looking at a spreadsheet that has 17 columns across, because there would be 5 gross expenditure amounts, 5 enrollment amounts, 5 averages, and then there'd be the last column, which is how North Shore compares with the average of the other 4. So I just try to avoid putting all of that data in front of you.
Yeah, I guess.
But I gladly would spread it out.
And I'll follow up maybe with an email, through Dr. Z explaining what I think I'm looking for. It's certainly not every one of those columns, and it could just be that an appendix that has a little bit more in it, or footnotes or something. Just because I spent some amount of time on trying to figure things out, but we didn't. you talk about, on the next page, you talk about the methodologies. You describe AOE over TAPU, but it wasn't clear that in fact, and I had in one of my comments, I would love to see that see that comparison, completely unaware that we were seeing that comparison. So I just would love for some of those connections to be made a little bit more clear, especially since this is a public document too, and as Trustee Ludmar points out, a lot of people are going to be reading it, not just this particular geek.
2 sheets back to back.
Right.
The reason why I put the 2 sheets back to back, they're both 22 expenditures. One is AOE per TAPU. That's the first one. The second one is total general fund expenses per enrolled pupil. And the trend is the same.
It's exactly the same, right? So I realize it's
Which is why I'm comfortable in
Right.
using expenditure per enrolled pupil, because although it's not what Jamie and I would use, it is something that a person coming into the community would say, let me see your budget. How many kids do you have? Let's divide the number of kids into the budget. My God, you're spending $46,000 per kid. Well, that's...
No, and I'm quite grateful for it, because one of the notes I made before I understood that I was looking at that weighted calculation, I was thinking to myself, well, since we have such a higher percentage of special ed expenditures, it would be really informative to see that, because perhaps that will narrow the gap. And in fact, you did demonstrate that the relationships are in fact practically identical, but it wasn't clear. I think that would be helpful. I did want to also just harken back to just a similar issue happens in 2 other places. Just in terms of perhaps footnoting or giving the context a little bit closer to where the data is, I guess, is what I'm struggling with. That idea that we have these extraordinary legal fees in our BOE, in that grouping, and it really, it's crazy looking, right? It's just off the wall, and it isn't explained. I mean, I think every one of us looking at it have lived with this enough to realize what that was, and it was extraordinary even within that extraordinary context, because it was a very unusual year for FOIL requests and the LIPA hearings and whatnot. But it doesn't become apparent until much later in the report for others that are reading it. And finally, the other example of that just took me a little bit to figure out, hearkening back to the St. Christopher's example. We in all of our, when we're looking at the budgets that we see, we code St. Christopher's in the 2270 code line, and this group, you have it in the BOCES 2250 line, and it took me a long time to, at least I'm pretty sure you do. I guess that's something I was would love to just clarify, because it's exactly the same amount of difference that I figured it had to be the St. Christopher's. And so I had that same question where I think we're showing the expense, but not necessarily the fact that that is money that in fact is reimbursed. Correct, sorry, at the report itself. Yep. So thank you for just entertaining those comments. Very generally, I can't resist also suggesting that just in terms of pure readability, if the color coding could be a little bit more distinct and more consistent. On the report itself, you start out with North Shore highlighted in yellow, and then later on the color changes, and it would just be helpful. And also to have them a little bit more obviously different. They're all kind of these pastel, the others are all sort of pastel. And there are times when it's really nice to be able to use the color coding to see the distinctions. It's low-hanging fruit, but it would be great. Okay, so everything else here, I think. I did want to just go back to the economies of scale and to the plea to include districts that are a little closer in size to ours. What was that little aside? Was that she's the geek on the trustees? Was anybody
And
else
I'm-
taking notes?
Yeah. But I, like the last meeting, I just told Mr. Jagon I'm going to watch the transcript and take notes.
And I'll follow
Just so
up
I'm
with-
not focused on my keyboard.
And
Yeah.
these are suggestions, and these are, micro suggestions that are not meant to add significant time, but if they do, throw them out, I just wanted to also emphasize this idea of economies of scale with one last sort of numbers thing, that in this comparison of these particular four nearby districts, the next larger district is almost a full 20% larger than us. It's really quite a significant difference. And I think, especially when Dr. Z was later talking about the sheer, enrollment numbers making such a difference, it is important to see something that's a bit closer. And yeah, so let's leave it at that. Okay. Okay. One last thing, a point to clarify in this report. If I tried to figure this out because I'm really not familiar with the specific buildings of the other districts. Manhasset Secondary School is actually grades 7 through 12, correct? But you have listed, I'm still at the beginning of the report, you have something called Manhasset Middle School listed.
I think what Mr. Jagon did is it is one building, so there's an efficiency there, but he separated out 7 and 8 and made that Manhasset Middle School. It technically is the middle school.
Okay.
They don't have a separate principal though, savings. And Manhasset High School separate, took 9 through 12 and listed that population.
Okay, so what we're calling Manhasset Secondary School here reflects 9 through 12. Manhasset Middle School reflects 7 and 8. Those numbers are accurate. Okay, thank you. Okay, just a few more seconds till I get over to my other document. Okay, I just wanted to reflect a little bit more on these presentations. It is so much to absorb and clearly incredible work that needed to be done. I think that we've heard a lot of suggestions, all over the spectrum tonight, going sort of directly to places to cut in terms of programs that, some of which I think of, being one of the many people who came here for specific reasons, right? Some of these programs are, existential to what we like to say is, what makes us us. And I don't agree that that's not where I want to directly go, having to listen to your presentations, both your presentations. But that's not what I think, we trustees are here to do tonight, right? We're giving you our opinions, but as Trustee Ludmart mentioned, we commissioned this report. We heard the community ask for it. We ourselves understood, eventually. I mean, I certainly resisted initially, as among others, I think, because having also lived through a large reorganization in another educational environment that was done with a very corporate look to it, only the bottom line being the concern, and this was at the university level, but it was a huge upheaval, and it was a topic of conversation. And what I heard, over and over again, what we all felt was the university was losing its ability to see students as students, not customers, right? We're not selling them a product, we're educating them. And so I'm preaching, I think, to the converted here, but I think that what our goal here is, or what I'd like our goal to be, is to just have, with this report and a beefed up version of it, if possible, we are giving our educational leadership, right, more tools in its toolkit to figure out the mountains of challenge in every regard that they've already, shown us they can handle last year. It is much more, I think, leagues more difficult this year, but I think what we see in what we see in Dr. Z's follow-up presentation today, which I can't wait to study more. I mean, some of those, the way you looked at those comparisons, Dr. Z, was very sobering and a really interesting interpretation right on top of what we saw from Mr. Dragone. That to me spoke to the efforts that have already been identified and are underway, including the things that Trustee Russo mentioned LAC should be doing. LAC is doing, right? We've been in those conversations with you. The subcommittees are formed. People are working on exactly those things, being in touch with the IDA folks, being in touch with the utilities. I mean, with your guidance and leadership, these are things that are happening. I think that being more activist, to use your word, in our approach with the state, this kind of, looking at making sure that the state hears understands the history of this and understands their responsibility not to be pulling the rug out from under us. I mean, we are talking, when we talk about the many, many millions that are, building up every darn year, right? And as you so eloquently pointed out in your follow-up presentation, it's not possible, on this, when you just look at this, to say, well, yeah, we'll cut 30 teaching positions and everything will be fine. So I think, I see this evolution in the way you're approaching the challenge that you have to cut even, the money that you have to cut this year, not to mention what we potentially have to cut in another 3 years. I see that evolving in an incredibly valuable way, and based on the kind of data that we're getting. And so the more we can keep doing that, having the conversations, the better we're going to be at this. Another few efforts that I think, again, are already underway that I've heard you talk about, and that are being discussed in the communities, right, are the redevelopment of these non-power generating properties so that they can be back on the tax rolls and be adequately contributing, again, long-term solution, which is as much what we need as anything. Working with the IDA and, smart development of Class 1 properties. It's just, I think, and that leads me to what I'll make my last point, which is that one of the areas that I do it either misunderstood your point, Mr. Dragone, or I disagree. But you talk about at the very, very end of your report when you're talking about the potential solutions, right? You mention the people the students who are enjoying this incredible breadth of choices. In a neighborhood setting, the opportunities like foreign language at a very early age, the extensive music programs, it goes on. And you kind of set that up. Oh, and not to mention, the increase in home values, which is in fact happening, everywhere. But certainly within our district, it seems like even as there have been some dips in other areas, I mean, I see this in my own relatively very small home in this community. Still, the trajectory is steadily up, right? That is the counterbalance to the folks who, as you write it, I think are not burdened with the cost of supporting our exemplary programs, but it is a different experience for them because their children, they either don't have children or their children have already gone through and are long since out. And many of these people are on fixed income. So I don't really want to be setting it up as a them versus, group A versus group B. I think that there is an incredible overlap here. Everybody has seen that increase and everybody benefits, from this is a privilege, right? To be supporting the next generation and the generation after that and the generation after that, the way we are uniquely doing in this district. So for me, I want to walk away with that positive note and the sense that our leadership has already shown that they can make the difficult decisions, they can present them to us, and I want us to continue to, work with you and others who can support them in getting to the right, granted, very difficult solutions, but there's no doubt in my mind that we can do
I
this.
had collaborated with Carol instead of Jamie in writing this report.
Yeah.
It would have said something along those lines. Be happy for the opportunities you're providing to children. Don't even consider reducing per pupil expense. But in fact, the charge I was given was more like a business official. If we needed to reduce per pupil expense, what possible solutions might there be?
Absolutely. I get that. I'm just saying I'm with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. Trustee Cashman.
Okay. Well, I think people will be relieved I don't have quite as much to offer the conversation as in terms of time. I have a few things that mostly have been said in some way, but are, I think, worth repeating. I want to commend Dr. Z and us as a board, frankly, for listening to the community. I know this idea was originally presented by Trustee Russo to provide this type of information. It was certainly, we got letters that it was community wanted. And that does, and similar to how Trustee Ledmar set up his comments, I think it is really important in the next draft to understand that this is a tool not just for the board, but for the community. And so in the next iteration, I think it is important that we provide data in a way that is consumable as consumable as possible. And these are hard conversations and we're not shying away from it, and good for us for that. But I think, when we provide a final draft of this, keeping that in mind, I think could inform a lot of the formatting issues and potential development of content. And perhaps what I would suggest is not in the scope of, the original charge and more in the joke that you threw away about conferring with Carol, but this is a conversation that has been had in this community for eons. Certainly before I was on the board, I tasked myself with understanding what some of the differentiators were with less expensive districts. And so I think that there are qualitative, and you're a unicorn, sir, as someone who has worked in so many districts and has this understanding of education. And so for me, I do think I look to you to be the smartest person in the room and provide things that the average citizen probably couldn't get just from, certain services. And that, as Dave mentioned, we have the appetite for that kind of detail. So I know from my own research and from sitting on this board that something that was very clear to me in the report that you provided is that we get a lot for our money in this district. We are providing a tremendous amount of education, and it is a numerator versus denominator issue to some extent, how that looks on paper. And I know Dr. Z has used that analogy many times. So, if we had a few more kids, it would look a lot different. And, I'll be a little bit all over the place in my comments, but that is not out of the realm of the possibility in the lifetime of the choices that we are going to make. There are huge swaths of land that already have sharks of development all over it. So building schools that the schools have been built a certain way over generations, and maintaining that trajectory and opportunity is important, because it is not inconceivable that within a very finite amount of time, our numerators will look very different, and the tax burdens the share of the tax burden will be different. And also, I'm looking forward to the conversation where Jamie chimes in about how, unfortunately, even though we're going to make cuts that hurt very deeply, the feeling of savings is not going to be euphoric. The numbers don't work that way. And our cost for saving and preserving, I'm by no means suggesting that cuts do not need to be made. I'm by no means suggesting that anything, that not every stone needs to be unturned to make sure that we're delivering the most efficiency possible. But what I know we will see from the numbers is that what you will continue to get for your money is extraordinary. And so I would ask that future drafts of this document could include things that help people understand these differentiators, starting elementary school languages, and that is evidence-based. When we start our instrumentation, and it bears out, right? Instrumentation is the wrong word. Dave's laughing at me. Thank you. It's late, and I'm last. I'm doing my best. I was tired walking in. But when we start offering lessons in instruments, and I loved seeing the amount of kids who are utilizing that comparatively in your report. So it's these things are paying off. And so understanding what some other different, the social support matrices that we offer, these tools, these professionals that are at the elementary school level, you don't get that everywhere. So the extracurriculars, the intramurals, you alluded to it in your original report, but I would like to see more meat on the bone there, and something that you're uniquely experienced to provide the community as a tool to understand the value that what you get for your money is going to be a really important part of this conversation as we are talking about the difference between $60 a year and, I'm not saying these numbers don't make a difference for people, but it is important to put that context to this conversation and understand the value there, to me. I think with respect to the special ed, it is hard to see us as a differentiator and not have questions about that. I loved what you said in your presentation, Dr. Z, about the way that you're approaching this question. And I am so interested to hear what you learn. Is it we're not intervening early enough, or are we so good that we're attracting people to our community because we are known for providing excellence in services? I know what I think it might be, but I think these are great questions, and it is worth asking. I certainly know that our legal obligation to provide these services is something that we take very seriously, and that this type of education and how we serve our most vulnerable in this community is something that makes us us, and it benefits all children. And so I think that is something worth taking the time to understand, and I know that we are. I can't get as granular as Trustee Mosca, but I am interested, even though the trends are the same and the different approaches to how we discover our cost per student, I do want to see that matrix personally, because I would like to see how it affects things. And even still, I think there are interesting ways to approach our cost per student. For example, we have a cost that is associated with our lunch program, our food service program, that is showing up in our cost per student, but it's paying for itself. So this is like how there are other districts that we're being compared to on a cost per student basis who don't perform that way. They completely outsource it, but it's still costing us in our analysis, costing us in terms of it's not a fair way to assess that way. And it's $1 million. I mean, it's not a small amount of money. So I would like to, and I think other trustees made this point, is really understand that we're talking about a total picture and figuring out, they're not spending there and we're spending here, and it's in this column, but really it comes off on that column. And I think it's been brought up with the St. Christopher's in different ways. I think it's important to understand the total picture in that way. It's worth saying to me out loud in this discussion that when we talk about elementary class sizes, unless we do take the nuclear option, which I do believe everyone kind of agrees it's kind of nuclear to consider a Princeton plan, and everything is on the table, and I think it's a wonderful discussion to have. Getting to that teacher ratio, it doesn't look the same in that if you have a 15, a 16, and a 17, and you want to collapse to 2, you're not at an 18 or a 19. You're at I can't do the arithmetic in my head. 24. Thank you. Thanks. What time is it?
Which we are allowed contractually to do.
Yes, it's within our contractual bounds. I picked those numbers out of a hat. I think it could easily very quickly fall out of contractual bounds. And so it is really hard, especially at an elementary school level, to do that. And further complicating, and a point that hasn't been brought up yet, or maybe has in a different way, is that we are on the North Shore of Long Island. We are surrounded by excellent schools providing excellent education, and we are right there. We are among them. Our population is lower. We still have an obligation to provide the same breadth of opportunities to our smaller population of to students, and that is expensive. It doesn't lead to large class sizes for every offering. So do we need to be completely thoughtful in our approach to this? 100% we do. But it is just the cost of doing business that is how this ends up in a small district. And like I started, I don't think we'll always be the smallest district. And it sounds like we haven't always been the smallest district. So I think everything else has been really well covered. I appreciate the opportunity for this conversation. I'm losing my ability to speak, so I guess I'll hand it over to President.
Thank you.
Macari.
Thank you, everybody. Mr. Dragone, you really have reminded all of us that the North Shore community has a long tradition in investing in our schools. And there's no waste, no misuse. These were deliberate decisions that generations of boards have made, and we have used those funds to educate our children. I was sort of most interested in some of those comparisons that show more of our money is going to actual instructional programs, not wasting it on non-instructional items. So we should be proud of that. We have a very comprehensive and robust program at every level, a program that I benefited from and so many students have. And that costs, and it is what we love. It's not a but, right? It's not it costs, but we love it. It costs, and we love it. I do appreciate all the data that was presented tonight. Data is important, but I do want to step away a little bit from the data and just have all of us think a little bit about the real life implications of some of the ideas that were presented today. How much do we radically want to change our schools? It is an emotional question, one that we are all being asked to answer, and there are real humans that are going to be affected. Children with special education needs, new home buyers who just saved up all their money for that down payment, thinking they were getting certain programs, employees who have devoted, years to this place who could be excess and what that means for their families and their ability to pay their mortgages. There are real implications here, and it's something as a community we all need to continue thinking about. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for your presentation, and we will continue tonight. Thank you.
I wonder where you guys were when I was serving in other districts. You are a tremendous Board of Education who give great thought to the questions that are in front of you. I don't envy you. My wife served on the Board of Education in Northport, and when she came home, she asked me how my day was, and I said, nothing compared to the stuff that you're going through, because it's a tough job and you get absolutely no payment for it. I just want to remind you that to preserve this education that is so quintessential Northport, you need support from your community. And I know that Dr. Z told me that last year you passed your budget by 100 and something votes. A contingent budget would blow this place up. To balance that against your desire to continue the programs that you have in place.
So can you just elaborate a little bit on what you mean by a contingency budget?
The budget is defeated twice. If you put it up in May and the voters say no, and then you put up another budget, revised or not, and the voters say no again, you must revert to the tax levy that was in place the prior year. As you're losing revenue from your pilots, your tax levy has to rise. I would be amazed if these three people were able to put together a budget with a zero tax levy increase. If they are, they're Houdini. I certainly wouldn't be able to in the circumstances that you're in. But to get to zero in the tax levy means you are forced to make cuts that you wouldn't otherwise want to make, which is why I refer to the 70%. Because there are people whose, yes, their homes are much more valuable because they're in North Shore versus being in another school district that will go nameless, right? But as a number of senior citizens have told me, my home may be worth more, but I can't eat my shingles. Food on the table. And there are people who are going to have to make those kinds of decisions. You have to balance those interests against the quintessential North Shore education that I know you guys want to offer. So thank you for the opportunity. I feel like I've unretired because I know I'm walking out of here tonight with more work, which is what was the case every time I was working, that every board meeting I went home from, there was more work to do. But it's been my pleasure to work with you and with these three people. You're very lucky. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, comments from the public. I don't believe we'll have any tonight unless there's some ghosts around here. All right, I will close public comments. Action 9 and 10 we'll take together. Action 9 is personnel A through H, and action 10 is approval of community ed instructors. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Do I have a second? Do I got a second? Questions, comments?
I have a question. I actually know the answer, but other people who are reading it won't. I know we don't necessarily discuss personnel items at the Board of Ed meeting, but I think there is a leave and then a part-time appointment that's readily explained, but might confuse people. On C and D.
Okay, yes. So we,
B and C, I think.
Yeah. I'm going to try and answer it in the generic.
Yeah, please.
Generic, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes from time to time we've had teachers take a leave from their full-time position for a myriad of reasons. And they take a part-time position for whatever reason, and then we'll ask somebody else to kind of make up that difference. So that's why.
That in B and C and D. So
So it's kind of like a
I don't
cost.
want to do it like by name, but
Yeah, but that's.
someone reads it, they might have the question.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say is it's kind of like a cost neutral thing. So we're actually taking like pieces of the puzzle and taking away from one and putting that same amount on somebody else. So, okay, yeah.
Thank you. All right, any other questions, comments? All in favor? Okay, excellent. Action 11, acceptance of donations. We're going to do 11A through C. Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
All right, all in favor? Okay. Action 12, disposal of inventory, and action 13, approval of change orders. Motion?
Motion.
Thank you. Questions, comments? All right, all in favor? And action 14, the approval of special education services, our IEPs. Okay, heard a second. Questions? All in favor? Thank you. Unfinished business. New business.
New business. So it sort of relates to tonight. I know there was a request made to post the report that we were discussing tonight, and I'm glad, that request was honored and it was posted. I think procedurally we should discuss any kind of report, like, we've done a lot of reports this year, right? We do a lot of reports every year. And I understand that, sometimes we'll have audit reports that are draft, right? But I think it makes for a better understanding for the people who are here or watching at home if they can have access to the report. So it's hard to see that or understand it if you're online and you don't have access or have it beforehand. And if you want to attend because the topic interests you, it may help people to narrow their questions or define their questions more readily rather than have, oh, gee, I wish I had been there and let me come back 2 weeks later. So all these sort of presentations, I think really should be posted, not just this report, but the reports on student achievement, when we do the special ed, I think we should be in the habit of posting them.
Any other new business?
Tiny thing that, I'm so sorry, I think I did actually mention this. Dr. Z, apologies, this is a repeat, I think. But it might have gotten lost in the amount of work you were doing this week. Our new sign outside just needs a space between C and cliff.
Oh, yes. And I'm sorry to invite you back. There's also one with my favorite graphic, the north and the shore. So some of these, usually the ones that are a little more graphically impressive, are done by the company. So we have to put in a request. So we put in that request. Shelley did that actually the next day.
Thank you, Shelley.
And so we'll have to do that with the other one too. The special ones, they have to do it. And there's like a day. So yeah, we're fixing those.
A young human at home who actually noticed it the first day.
And
She would notice it. She would be.
Promised that I would tell you, and then a week went by, and then it's like, did you tell Dr. Z? I'm sorry, I did already, but
We're on it, Ann.
Thank you for
I have
that.
a question about the sign since we're talking about it. I think it looks great, by the way. I was just wondering, is there a way to just put everything that's on the calendar, like every booster club meeting, every SEPTA meeting, every board meeting, like is there a way to just have that entered, or does it have to, I don't know how it works. Does it have to manually get done every single day, or?
It does have to be put in manually. It's not like, so I did a test one, the one that's Go Vikings Go, if you saw it. It's very beta, very basic, but Shelley did the one for the board meeting. So we do have the template, you just have to change some of the numbers. So we can do that. I feel like things like that we'll do internally. And like Don and Margie, Sharon and Dahlia, they're going to do their things. And then any requests that come on to us, like Friday Flyer requests from like boosters, parent organizations, we'll do. So yeah, we're actually, I think, going to be looking for content. So
I do think it. Oh, really?
yeah, but
Good point.
we'll as they come up, like boosters, I think is a good one. Like the things that are on the calendar.
Yeah, just like the evening meetings, I think. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, as a person who no longer has kids in the school, the thing I miss the most is the daily notice that was sent to the high school. I feel like, oh, gee, I wish I had known that was going on. I would have gone to that game, or I would have gone. I mean, I do get the Friday Flyers because I do get the emails because I'm subscribed to the emails. But when you don't get the daily notice, you're kind of out of the loop.
Mine can be the new daily notice.
I just had the smallest thing to share, which is I think the board and should know, and central office at the middle school play, which was fantastic, not only because my daughter was in it, but she had a very small role. But the high school maskers made such an effort. They made sure they assigned each high school masker a junior masker, and they each wrote them a letter. And then they showed up in force, especially for the last performance, had signage as they were coming out, were cheering each performer. It was so moving, and I just really wanted to recognize that effort and the team's camaraderie that went on about it. I know it really moved my daughter, who's a participator, but just as an observer, just such a show of grace and generosity by the high school kids. I really was very touched.
Thank you for sharing that. I love that story. Anything else? Okay. Everyone needs to go home. It's very late. All right. I will adjourn this meeting. Everyone drive home safely. School's tomorrow. Thanks, everyone. Ah, it's my lucky day. My lucky day. Let's see, right there. I'm even going to do this for you. Thank you. You know what? I always forget to give you this. Let me just make sure. Yeah, I alternate. I know. I alternate. There you go. Thank you. Good night, everyone. Bye.